Bem-vindos ao segundo dia do encontro de outono do ICOM Portugal. Vamos avançar com não a apresentação habitual, mas algo de diferente, que são os resultados de um inquérito que o ICOM Portugal promoveu a partir de maio e que vão ser apresentados justamente por dois membros dos corpos sociais do ICOM, que passo a apresentar. Um deles, Gonçalo de Carvalho Amaro, é licenciado em História, variante de Arqueologia pela Universidade Nova de Lisboa, mestrado em Arqueologia pela mesma Universidade e doutor pela Universidade Autónoma de Madrid. Atualmente faz parte da equipa técnica do Museu de São Roque, da Santa Casa da Misericórdia de Lisboa, sendo professor convidado no Magister em Património Cultural da Pontifícia Universidade Católica do Chile e investigador integrado no Instituto de História Contemporânea da Universidade de Lisboa. É autor de livros e artigos em revistas científicas de vários países sobre arqueologia, património, cultura material e museus, destacando-se os livros Pessoas, Objetos e Sentimentos, Ensaios e Reflexões sobre a Construção Social do Património, de 2015, e La Trama de los Objetos, de 2017, em coedição com José Gomes e Olaya Sanfuentes. Trabalhou ainda no Conselho de Monumentos Nacionais do Chile, no projeto Vaitea, de devolução de terras às comunidades Rapa Nui da Ilha de Páscoa, no Museu Chileno de Arte Pré-Colombino e no Museu de História Natural de Sintra. Foi consultor no projeto ICOM Eulak, da União Europeia, Museums and Community Concepts, Experiences and Sustainability in Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, e no âmbito da sua investigação de pós-doutoramento na Pontifícia Universidade Católica do Chile, estudou a mestiçagem chilena através da cultura material. O Dr. David Felismino é licenciado em História, do ramo científico, e pós-graduado em História Moderna pela Faculdade de Ciências Sociais e Humanas da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, e encontra-se a concluir o mestrado em Empreendedorismo e Estudos de Cultura, na variante Património e Projetos Culturais do ISCTE. Desempenhou funções como investigador e curador no Instituto de Ciências Sociais na Casa Fronteira da Lorna, no Museu Geológico, no Museu Nacional de História Natural e da Ciência e no Museu da Saúde, tendo sido responsável pelo desenho do projeto museológico deste último. Desde janeiro de 2020 é diretor adjunto do Museu de Lisboa, EGEAC, e os seus principais domínios científicos e interesses versam sobre os museus e a história das coleções, bem como sobre vários aspectos do cotidiano, da ciência e da saúde, no período moderno e contemporâneo, tendo publicado vários livros, catálogos, artigos e comissariado várias exposições sobre estes temas. E, sem mais, passo então a palavra aos meus colegas.
Bom dia a todos. Uma pequena introdução de enquadramento do inquérito. Nos últimos anos, as instituições culturais que visam a preservação, interpretação e disseminação do património cultural, e mais particularmente os museus, foram chamados a contribuir ou foram envolvidas na discussão de um conjunto de temáticas com as quais estão diretamente ou indiretamente implicadas. A escravatura, o colonialismo, a restituição de bens culturais, todos temas que já foram abordados ontem, entre muitas outras temáticas. Esta discussão assenta na contestação efetiva que os museus não são neutrais. Muito do património não europeu existente nas nossas coleções, ou em museus ocidentais de uma forma geral, assenta no aprisionamento, na tortura, na violência de pessoas e comunidades e no roubo ou usurpação de muitos dos seus testemunhos materiais, ocupando estes hoje lugar de destaque em museus de todo o mundo e nomeadamente em Portugal. Nesse sentido, o facto de os museus e demais organizações culturais terem sido envolvidos nestes debates acarreta o reconhecimento da sua responsabilidade simultaneamente cívica, social e política. Desta forma, para promover um debate construtivo sobre estas matérias, o ICOM resolveu, em 2021, promover um inquérito sobre a presença de coleções não europeias em museus e coleções nacionais, dirigido a todos os museus, sejam eles públicos, privados, de âmbito local, regional ou nacional, cuja resposta esteve aberta de maio até dia 15 de outubro deste ano. E hoje são os primeiros resultados deste inquérito que iremos apresentar, ainda que o inquérito vá ficar aberto até início de dezembro deste ano. Entretanto, esta semana já recebemos mais respostas, portanto, os dados que são apresentados hoje de manhã referem às respostas dadas até ao fim de semana, só para contextualizar. Se tomarmos como referencial o número de museus em 2020 apresentado pelo Instituto Nacional de Estatística, temos 414 museus em Portugal e obtivemos 45 respostas, o que dá mais ou menos 11% do universo museológico nacional a responder ao inquérito. Se tomarmos como referencial, por exemplo, os cerca de 160 museus da RPM, da Rede Portuguesa de Museus, obviamente que este número, que pode parecer até diminuto ou uma participação reduzida, subirá e, como se dizia até hoje de manhã, ao pequeno almoço em conjunto, não envergonha ninguém e não deixa de ser um resultado significativo. Se olharmos de uma forma geral para a distribuição dos 45 respondentes, percebemos que a maioria dos museus que responderam são, obviamente, museus situados no continente, mas com expressão significativa também dos museus dos dois arquipélagos, dos Açores e da Madeira, e já veremos um bocadinho mais à frente as razões pelas quais os museus, quer dos Açores, quer da Madeira, participaram de forma expressiva na resposta ao inquérito. Aqui uma breve lista dos museus que já tinham respondido, breve não, a totalidade dos museus que responderam ao inquérito até domingo passado. E agora, se quisermos caracterizar mais em pormenor esses museus, percebemos que das 45 respostas, ou dos 45 respondentes, 37 identificaram coleções não europeias e 8 responderam que não tinham coleções não europeias nos seus acervos. A grande maioria dos museus respondeu à pergunta da entrada ou da incorporação dessas coleções antes da Convenção de 1970, portanto, que as suas coleções, na maioria, tinham entrado estas coleções tinham entrado nos seus acervos antes da Convenção de 1970, assunto, aliás, que já foi abordado ontem. Portanto, dos respondentes, corresponde a cerca de 82% dos museus com coleções não europeias nos seus acervos, 8 museus responderam que não, já disse, e 34 museus responderam, ou seja, 76% que as suas coleções entraram antes de 1970. Se olharmos para a distribuição geográfica, percebemos que a maioria dos respondentes são museus a sul do Tejo, não é? Portanto, Lisboa e Val do Tejo, Alentejo e Algarve, corresponde mais ou menos a 51% dos respondentes. O resto distribui-se pelo centro e pelo norte, portanto, o norte 7 respondentes e o centro 4 respondentes, e a resposta significativa dos Açores e da Madeira, que se deve essencialmente ao facto de terem recebido o inquérito, não só através do ICOM, mas também através das próprias direções regionais que pediram aos museus que estão na sua tutela a resposta. E isso explica, em grande parte, também aquilo que nós podemos interpretar à primeira vista como uma participação reduzida, não é? Os museus que receberam o inquérito simultaneamente pelo ICOM e pela sua tutela direta tiveram maior adesão à resposta, ou resposta mais rápida, e depois também temos de ter em conta as circunstâncias do inquérito. Maio a outubro de 2021 corresponde ao pós-segundo confinamento, reabertura e atividade intensa dos museus, obviamente. Corresponde também ao período do verão, portanto, naturalmente, recursos humanos de férias. Portanto, isso tudo veio dificultar, obviamente, em certa medida, a resposta ao inquérito. E depois, de uma forma geral, também um dos assuntos que foi abordado ontem várias vezes, ou referido várias vezes, que é a falta de recursos humanos, não é? Mesmo que o museu tenha, portanto, o seu património inventariado, obviamente que é necessário despender algum tempo para a compilação dos dados, de acordo com as perguntas, e isso só se faz com recursos humanos adequados. Se olharmos mais atentamente, se quisermos caracterizar os respondentes pelas suas tutelas, percebemos que houve uma participação maioritária dos museus municipais, que corresponde mais ou menos a 24,4%, e regionais, 22,2%. em particular dos Açores e da Madeira, uma participação muito diminuta dos museus nacionais, na tutela da DGPC, apenas 4 responderam, e, finalmente, a participação dos 3 principais museus universitários, que, como sabemos, preservam uma quantidade importante de coleções não europeias, não é? Pela sua história e a natureza das instituições, portanto, Lisboa, Porto e Coimbra. Se quisermos caracterizar os museus de acordo com a natureza das suas coleções ou a sua missão, vemos que maioritariamente responderam museus, digamos, genéricos da história, portanto, que albergam todo o tipo de coleções, cerca de 45%, e museus de arte, 24%, e, obviamente, tendo em conta também a participação significativa dos museus universitários, é uma participação significativa dos museus científicos, 20%, e dos museus etnológicos e etnográficos, de uma forma geral, 9%.
Bem, fazemos agora aqui uma pequena passagem de testemunho. Relativamente à área geográfica, podemos notar a maioria dos objetos são provenientes da Ásia, logo seguidos da África, depois da América do Sul, América Central, América do Norte, Sudeste Asiático, Médio Oriente e, finalmente, a Oceania. Ou seja, isto pode-nos inferir maioritariamente coleções asiáticas, 19%, e as africanas, 17%. Depois já vamos ver aqui a relação deste tipo de coleções também com o tipo de museus que acabou por responder. Isto é relativamente importante. Se quisermos fazer uma procura mais particular das origens, podemos encontrar, sobretudo, a predominância da China, ou seja, a maior parte dos museus acaba por ter coleções maioritariamente da China, se bem que não é uma diferença muito substancial, como vem ali, 19%, seguida, como era de esperar, dos países nos quais Portugal teve colónias. Sim? Diga. Não consegue ver. Tudo bem. Não consegue ver nem ver as percentagens. Está bem. Está bem. Claro. Então, temos ali num castanho alaranjado China, com 19%. Acho que assim está claro. Boa. Fez-me o sinal que sim, é porque está perceptível. Depois, seguimos-nos ali num amarelo torrado Angola. Eu tenho jeito para isto, parece. E depois, não, peço desculpa, a Índia com 16%, num castanho claro. Depois, Angola com 13%. Depois, Moçambique ali numa espécie de bege. Diga. Muito bom. Bem, agora é mais fácil. Depois temos aqui Moçambique, ou seja, com a mesma percentagem de Angola. Depois o Brasil, seguido de Timor-Leste, Guiné-Bissau, Cabo Verde e São Tomé e Príncipe. É dizer, nota-se aqui, o que sobressai é sobretudo a China. Depois todos os outros países são países que estão relacionados com a presença portuguesa. A Índia no geral, mas provavelmente, se calhar, aqui a percentagem de elementos relacionados com Goa, Damão e Diu será evidente. Sim? Então, os museus científicos e etnográficos predominam, sobretudo, coleções de origem africana. Ou seja, está presente nos 4 museus etnográficos que responderam a este inquérito, nos 8 científicos e em mais 6. Mas nota-se, sobretudo, a predominância africana nos museus de caráter científico e etnográfico. Os museus artísticos responderam maioritariamente Ásia e China, ou seja, é uma resposta maioritária nos 11 museus de arte e em mais 8 museus. Então, no que diz respeito às coleções não europeias identificadas por tipologia, podemos ver que, maioritariamente, as coleções artísticas tiveram uma resposta de 31%, as etnográficas, 29%, arqueológicas representaram 14%, e, no que diz respeito às coleções científicas, histórico-natural, antropologia, são mais residuais, cerca de 16%, do que nos museus científicos. Aqui só algumas imagens de alguns museus que responderam, só para terem um pouco uma ideia geral das coleções. Aqui, o Museu da Ciência. Aqui, para dar um pouco também esta ideia de porque é que a China e a Ásia são maioritárias nas respostas e, sobretudo, nos museus de caráter histórico ou artístico. A quantificação das coleções não europeias por tipologia e por museus que responderam. Ou seja, vemos aqui que 43% dos museus responderam afirmaram que conservavam entre 100 e 1000 objetos não europeus. Esta foi a percentagem maioritária em termos de quantidade de representação. 53% dos museus genéricos de história afirmaram conservar coleções não europeias, e museus científicos e etnográficos, pela natureza das coleções, são aqueles que possuem mais exemplares. Normalmente responderam ao tramo máximo que nós tínhamos, que era mais de 5.000. Foi o tramo que nós colocámos, provavelmente se calhar até tem um número muito superior. E aqui nos gráficos conseguimos ver essa percentagem, aqui sobretudo como vem das coleções etnográficas, que são as maioritárias. E as respostas? Aqui um aspecto bastante importante. Muitas destas coleções não têm documentação associada, e este é um processo que é muito relevante para aqueles que trabalham nos museus, porque para saber em que medida é que os objetos entraram nesse museu e quais as circunstâncias que a eles estão associadas. E aqui reparamos que 38% não têm essa documentação associada, e que, na generalidade, os museus científicos são aqueles que têm a percentagem mais elevada de objetos com a documentação já associada. Aqui, outro aspecto, neste caso importante, que é o facto de a maioria dos museus que responderam e efetivamente disseram-nos que as suas coleções estavam inventariadas. Isto é, podemos... Não avançou? Ou seja, 91,8%, ou seja, 92% apresenta as coleções inventariadas, o que é diferente a ter uma documentação associada ou não. Mas já é bom sinal de que as coleções estão praticamente todas elas inventariadas. O contrário já se vê, por exemplo, com o facto de elas estarem estudadas ou não, que é o que vamos ver em seguida. Como disse, mais de 75% dos museus responderam e afirmaram que estas coleções estavam inventariadas, e nós fizemos uma pergunta seguinte, que foi: àqueles que tinham as peças inventariadas, qual a percentagem de peças nas suas coleções que estavam inventariadas? Porque uma pessoa pode dizer que estão inventariadas, mas pode haver uma ou outra que não estão, e mesmo aqueles que responderam que não podem ter uma percentagem reduzida, e nós quisemos fazer essa relação. E podemos ver aqui que são casos diminutos em que têm menos de 10%, entre 3% a 10% que não estaria inventariado. Aqui entre entre cerca de 10 a 30, 30 a 50, como vemos, o que domina é aqueles que têm quase a totalidade das peças, a percentagem maior das coleções inventariadas. Coleções não europeias. Aqui depois é outro aspecto que já não é tão positivo, que é, apesar de tudo, maioritário, mas ainda assim não comparado com o número de peças inventariadas, em que tivemos apenas 60%, a resposta de 60% destas coleções que estariam inventariadas e estudadas. Ou seja, aqui o número é... Isto é, das coleções inventariadas, só 60% é que estão estudadas. Ou seja, aqui o número reduz um pouco. Relativamente às peças estudadas, temos já também os números dispares. Isto é, as pessoas dizem que 60% respondeu que tinha as peças estudadas, mas como pede perceber... Tem peças estudadas, mas tem todas as peças estudadas ou qual a percentagem de peças que tem estudadas? E aí sim, depois, vemos que as respostas já não são tão abonatórias, apesar de se notar, aqui notamos que só 21% aqui só 21% tem mais de 90% das peças estudadas. Vemos aqui um número de 23% entre 10 a 30. Vemos aqui também entre 10 e 20, ou seja, as peças, 60% diz que as peças estão estudadas, mas depois vamos a ver, e não é assim tão grande a percentagem de peças de toda a coleção não europeia que esteja assim tão estudada. Relativamente... podemos então concluir, sim, que apenas 21% dos museus afirmaram que estas coleções estão devidamente estudadas e mais de 58% afirmou que as suas coleções estão, em parte, por estudar. Relativamente à incorporação no museu, que também é um aspecto interessante, vemos aqui que cerca de 46% das peças foram doadas, ou seja, Não, há aqui qualquer coisa que não está. Bem, vemos que 29% das peças foram incorporadas por doação, seguidas, ou seja, logo o elemento a seguir, ou mais maioritário a seguir à doação, é a compra. Depois temos a resposta depósito, com 16%, seguida de outras como transferência, recolha, achado ou outro. Ou outro é quando não se sabe. Mas é interessante vermos aqui esta resposta da doação e da compra. Vemos também que, no que diz respeito ao uso destas coleções no âmbito de exposições de longa duração, exposições temporárias, atividades educativas, vemos que a maioria das 37 respostas, estamos a falar das 37 respostas que disseram que tinham coleções não europeias, porque houve das 45 respostas, 8 que disseram que não tinham, não é? Destas 37 que acabaram por responder, a maioritária, uma percentagem bastante importante, ou seja, 81%, já utilizou essas coleções no âmbito de atividades. De modo geral, o inquérito esteve aberto 4 meses, tivemos uma adesão muito moderada. Eu digo moderada, não digo que é débil, porque temos que ter em conta que dos cerca de 414 museus, a grande maioria não tem capacidade para responder ao inquérito, não é? Falamos de museus que muitas vezes não estão abertos permanentemente, não têm, se calhar, técnicos ou pessoas com a capacidade para fazer esse inventário em relação às peças. Diríamos que, no geral, Os museus que teriam capacidade para responder a isto seriam os cerca de, não chega a 200 museus que estão inscritos na rede. Esses sim teriam essa capacidade, por isso é que eu coloco como muito moderada. Não estou a contar aqui a percentagem de 11% em relação aos 414 destas 45 respostas, mas eu estou a pensar mais nos cerca de 200 museus. Houve, sim, e isto é algo que o ICOM tem que referir, que houve pouca divulgação do inquérito por parte dos órgãos de tutela. Nós sentimos isso. Nós sentimos que, por exemplo, outras atividades nossas são difundidas nas redes sociais e da tutela e o inquérito não foi. Não foi. E isso certamente teve alguma influência. Lisboa e Val do Tejo foi a região com mais respostas, não é de estranhar, porque também é a região que acaba por ter mais museus. Seguida do Algarve, e aí sim funcionou a divulgação, e da região autónoma dos Açores também, ou seja, foi outra região na qual houve a intervenção, no caso dos Açores, do Governo Regional, que fez a promoção, e no caso do Algarve também a rede dos Museus do Algarve que acabou por fazer essa promoção. Podemos, sim, a referência que já foi também referida pelo David no início, né, das regiões autónomas, participação maioritária dos museus municipais, 24%, regionais, 22%, seguidos dos museus nacionais. E eu, quando falo aqui dos museus nacionais, nós, se calhar, não fizemos bem essa nota, são os museus nacionais da tutela da DGPC. Isto é, nós tivemos 8 respostas de palácios ou monumentos que são considerados nacionais. Aqui, quando falamos nacionais, são só as da tutela da DGPC. Aí sim a resposta houve pouca adesão, foram só 4. E seguidos dos museus privados, de fundação, entre outros. Aspecto importante, que foi muito referido ontem, e eu volto a frisar esse assunto da Convenção da Unesco, porque é mesmo importante. 76% respondeu que os objetos entraram antes desta Convenção. Proveniência maioritariamente asiática, em particular da China, que se explica pela maior adesão dos museus com características artísticas e históricas. Depois, como vem em seguida, maioritariamente as coleções artísticas, com 31%, etnográficas, arqueológicas, em consonância também com a natureza dos museus que acabaram por participar mais, não é? De história, arte e científicos. Depois, a doação, a presença das peças compradas e este limbo que é esta questão do fundo antigo. Não é? Depois, 62% com documentação associada, um aspecto que, bom, está acima da maioria, mas poderia ser melhor, mas pronto, é o que há. 92% está inventariado, o que eu acho que é muito positivo. 60% está estudado, embora, e este é o aspecto importante, esse estudo seja relativo, não é? Porque temos 58% desses 60% que dizem que está estudado, com menos de 50% do acervo estudado. Ou seja, este também acaba por ser um ponto negativo. 81% foi objeto de exposições permanentes, científicos e arte, temporárias ou atividades educativas de exposição. E para terminar, ou seja, trata-se de um diagnóstico preliminar, não é? Devido ao número de respostas, carece de aprofundamento, é preciso uma maior divulgação junto dos museus e por isso nós optámos por manter o inquérito aberto até inícios de dezembro e na esperança que outros museus possam participar, porque achamos que isto é muito importante para os próprios museus em si, para conhecerem as próprias coleções e saberem com o que é que contam. Existe, este é o aspecto negativo, um conhecimento deficitário destas coleções, que são órfãos, sem documentação associada, e depois o outro aspecto negativo também, que diz respeito ao estudo limitado das das coleções. Obrigado. Como? Podemos o quê? Pode.
Sim.
Se calhar agora começamos nós.
Neste momento porque temos a senhora austríaca à espera, mas se for só uma...
Ou se não fazemos tudo assim.
Na mesa redonda. A ideia era fazer tudo no fim, justamente porque há este encadeamento. Sim.
Quer fazer a apresentação?
Temos a senhora austríaca à espera, não é?
Sim, pode fazer ali na mesa.
Posso fazer na mesa?
Sim.
Vamos avançar agora para a participação de uma colega que vai fazer a sua comunicação online. Estão a ouvir? Eu passo a apresentá-la brevemente. Pois é, isso que eu estava a perguntar. Agora, Elke Kellner recebeu um mestrado em História da Arte e estudou Arqueologia na Universidade de Viena, Áustria, e Universidade de Yale, Estados Unidos. Desde 2014 é diretora-geral do ICOM Áustria, Comitê Nacional do Conselho Internacional de Museus. Iniciou a série de ICOM Palmyra Talks para apoiar a luta contra a pilhagem e o tráfico ilícito de bens culturais e é perita para a OSCE nesse campo. Desde 2016 coleciona no Master Course Cultural Heritage na Universidade do Danúbio, em Krems, Áustria. Desde 2014 é membro da direção do Blue Shield Áustria e desde 2019 membro da direção do ICOM Europa. Kellner iniciou a sua carreira como assistente do diretor do MAC, Museu Austríaco de Artes Aplicadas, Arte Contemporânea, em Viena, seguida de projetos curatoriais para a Vienna Art Week e TBA 21, Thyssen-Bornemisza Art Contemporary. De 2006 a 2013 trabalhou na Corporação Austríaca de Rádio e Televisão, Rádio Áustria 1, desde 2011 como chefe do Departamento de Eventos e ao mesmo tempo como jornalista no Departamento de Ciência da Rádio Austríaca. Em 2013 trabalhou como produtor na ORF 3, Corporação Austríaca de Radiodifusão. Ora, I welcome Elke. I think she will be online by now. Good morning. Are you listening? Is it okay? We've had a few communication problems, but I think everything is solved by now. Is it okay? I don't think so. It's okay? Yes. Eu acho que o som não deve estar muito...
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much, Maria, for this kind introduction. I'm very happy to be with you all here, at least virtually, and thank you so much again for these kind words at the start, Maria. Dear colleagues, I'm very happy to present my lecture today, and I will just start to share it. Just a second to turn my presentation on. So here we go. Proactively addressing inequalities and inclusion becomes essential for museums when fulfilling their mission to serving society. This becomes even more important in a context of increasing movements of populations, polarizations, and divisive public discourses. This opening sentence of the ICOM mission statement on the subject of cultural democracy and inclusion highlights an essential role of museums in our society. A role that, alongside the classical tasks of collecting, preserving, exhibiting, researching, and communicating objects, emphasizes social sustainability aspects. Museums are public spaces in an open society. In times of crisis, in particular, they offer important new perspectives, but also the possibility of providing sensory, emotional, and aesthetic experiences beyond the difficult challenges of everyday life. Museums focus on the challenges of today's world, and in this sense are also important extracurricular educational institutions. In a world of increasing complexity, they attempt to communicate facts and context, but also values such as justice and equality, as precursors to sustainable development. If museums wish to achieve this aim, it is vital for them to confront their own history and that of their collections. Through the contribution by the art historian Bénédicte Savoy and the Senegalese economist Felwine Sarr, who demand a systematic restitution policy with regard to contested objects, public awareness of the processing of the colonial past has turned its focus to the responsibility of museums. This has given rise in recent years to intensive discussion by the international museum community on an ethical approach to contested objects in museum collections. The positions range widely from the demand of restitutions for individual objects that are particularly encumbered by the legitimate context in which they maybe were acquired, to ways in which European museums and their international partners can address the difficult heritage of the colonial past. As the International Council of Museums, ICOM is aware of its special role in dealing with this responsibility. The 8 basic principles in the ICOM Code of Ethics for Museums offer a universal ethical basis for museum work and are acknowledged as international guidelines supported by museums throughout the world. The basic principle that museums should work in close collaboration with the communities from which their collections originate, as well as those they serve, also provides a framework for dealing with collection objects from colonial contexts. I quote the ICOM Code of Ethics. Museum collections reflect the cultural and natural heritage of the communities from which they have been derived. As such, they have a character beyond that of ordinary property, which may include strong affinities with national, regional, local, ethnic, religious, or political identity. This great importance of international cooperation between museums is highlighted further. I quote, "Museums should promote the sharing of knowledge, documentation, and collections with museums and cultural organizations in the countries and communities of origin. The possibility of developing partnerships with museums in countries or areas that have lost a significant part of their heritage should be explored." The ICOM Code of Ethics thus offers an internationally recognized ethical guideline for restituting cultural objects of particular significance for the history or identity of a country or nation, by suggesting that museums declare their willingness, I quote, "to initiate dialogue for the return of cultural property to a country or people of origin. This should be undertaken in an impartial manner, based on scientific, professional, and humanitarian principles, as well as applicable local, national, and international legislation. When a country or people of origin seeks the restitution of an object or a specimen that can be demonstrated to have been exported or otherwise transferred in violation of the principles of international and national conventions, and shown to be part of that country's or people's cultural or natural heritage, the museum concerned should, if legally free to do so, take prompt and responsible steps to cooperate in this return," end quote. This passage demonstrates the difficulties and limitations confronting museums in this process. If the objects, as in the case of Austrian federal museums, are not owned by the museums, but by a higher statutory authority, in this case the Republic of Austria, Apart from the ethical and scientific expertise of the museum in question, the approval of this authority must be obtained before the objects can be restituted. This situation, of course, does not release museums from their responsibility. On the contrary, museum collections are called upon to fulfill their role in social education and culture by investigating and communicating information about objects in a cultural, intellectual, and art historical context that goes beyond the Eurocentric worldview. In addressing the colonial era, new questions therefore arise today. How did the objects arrive in our collections? What significance do they have in countries of origin? Were they acquired legitimately or perhaps by force? What information do the museum archives have about them? The event series, The Museum in a Colonial Context, taking place in October and December 2019, organized jointly by the Austrian Federal Chancellery and ICOM Austria in cooperation with the Weltmuseum Wien, was a first step towards addressing these questions. The first part, entitled Austrian Federal Museums and Acquisitions in the 19th and 20th Centuries, led by the Federal Chancellery, dealt with research into objects in Austrian Federal Museum collections, while the second part, conceived by ICOM Austria, Our Responsibility for Objects with a Contested History, looked in particular at the practical examples from the international museum community. The various contributions confirmed that the results of provenance research inevitably have to be taken into account when processing the colonial past of museums and their collections. Knowledge of the origins of an object is the basis for a responsible ethical approach to it. Provenance research on contested objects in a colonial context must therefore become a priority for museums, so as to enable them to respond appropriately. Political decision makers are also called upon to create the necessary framework by supporting provenance research projects. I believe that the Austrian Commission for Provenance Research, which has acquired exceptional competence and in its investigation under the 1998 Art Restitution Act of the provenance of objects expropriated as the results of persecution during the Nazi period, could act as a model in this regard. In collaboration with the excellent provenance research departments in Austrian federal museums, great progress could be made in this way in provenance research in a colonial context. A further important step would be to extend this research to contested objects in the collection of provincial, municipal, and regional museums. This intensive academic research would provide a stable basis for dealing with contested objects in our collection. As a parallel measure, ICOM Austria could develop guidelines for Austrian museums and decision makers, similar for the German guidelines for museums, and should be based on the Austrian situation and legislation. Apart from basic information from various disciplines on colonialism and museums, these guidelines should above all include an international perspectives. This would create an awareness that the acquisition of collection items in colonial context can be associated with the use of force and/or pronounced dependency relationships. In addition, collection items can be assigned to colonial context, can reflect discriminatory representations and colonial or racist ideologies. Respectful and sensitive dialogue on dealing with collection items from colonial context with the states originating society
Será depois objeto do texto no próximo último do ICOM, que sairá em dezembro de janeiro. Portanto, tudo aquilo que neste momento já foi possível apurar e eventualmente mais alguma informação que seja possível de capear daqui até lá. Ficará esse registro, mas naturalmente o assunto não termina. Temos a clara percepção do que foi o primeiro passo, como aliás os meus colegas referiram, há muito trabalho a fazer a partir daqui. Portanto, os momentos seguintes estão neste momento a ser ainda pensados, mas naturalmente que contamos com a colaboração de todos e com as vossas opiniões e as vossas sugestões. Em relação àquilo que espero continuará a ser a nossa manhã de trabalho, começámos por ouvir a experiência austríaca, vamos depois continuar a ouvir colegas de outras geografias europeias sobre o mesmo tema. Haverá uma pequena mudança de programa. Vamos ter primeiro a Hannah Pinnock, que nos irá falar da experiência holandesa.
Desculpe, nós já temos a Elke online. Eu vou só testar o som com ela, por favor. Cláudia, pergunta se ela...
Both end. So culture is about our identity and origins. It is about protecting witnesses of the past, preserving those values that could help today and tomorrow in the reconciliation of conflicts. It is about culture as a force of resistance, as a source of strength to combat need and rebuild what has been destroyed. The protection and preservation of our shared cultural heritage is vital for security and peace in the future. Our awareness of the need to protect our shared cultural heritage and the social responsibility we are prepared to assume is reflected in the way we face up to our responsibility for objects with a burdened history and the strategies to develop to jointly to do justice to this difficult legacy. ICOM Austria has published a book in German and English about the two conferences we had. So if you are further interested in this topic, I relate to this new book. And I thank you so much for being with me, and I hope you have a very nice day of lectures today, and thank you again for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elke, for your presentation and for all the patience with the technological difficulties we have had. I don't know if you still have time.
Não, pode continuar. Sim.
For some questions, since I think you will not be able to be with us much longer.
Sim, ela diz que sim.
Yes? So please, if anyone wants to ask, we have to make a small adjustment, because Elke will not be able to follow the round table. So if anyone wants to make a question, please go ahead.
Tem de usar o microfone, por favor. Alguém quer colocar uma questão? Acho que não. Okay.
Well, I think you will be probably contacted by some of us related to the publication you have just shown, and we are all very interested, and we'll be also interested in knowing what were the steps that were taken after the meeting that in some way is similar to the one we are having today. What did you, apart from the publication, of course, what are the next steps?
Eu? Não. Sorry. Oops.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just realized you couldn't hear me. I hope it works now. So thank you again for this question. ICOM Austria is now working on guidelines to Austria is developing for the Austrian museum community, how to handle objects with contested history. We will build a working group with Austrian museum professionals and professionals from the scientific community. And as other countries have done before, like Germany or other European countries, we try to develop those guidelines in special respect to the Austrian situation, to the Austrian laws, and to have guidelines and recommendations for the different types and kinds of Austrian museums. And we are supported by the Austrian Ministry of Culture in this respect. And also we try to intensify provenance research. And for the publication, I will be sure to send a copy to ICOM Portugal to you, Maria, so you have at least one copy of this publication that could be of value. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elke. Once again, sorry for all the technological complications. We were very happy to have you here today. And we are, of course, going to be in touch for further developments. Thank you so much for your participation. Any further question? No. Well, thank you then. I'm going to give the floor to Hannah Pinnock, that is here today with us. Hannah, could you please come here while I make your presentation? And Anna has worked in several Dutch museums in the Inspectorate for Cultural Heritage, and he's now Senior Advisor and Project Manager at the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands. She also was for a year Acting Director General of ICOM in Paris. The theme of Anna's presentation is Traces of Slavery and Colonial History in the Museum Collections. Welcome, Hannah, and thank you so much for being with us.
Só um bocadinho, por favor, porque eu estou a transmitir os nossos agradecimentos à Elke. Ok? Bom. Agora, Ana, your PowerPoint is this one? Okay. I guess so. Yes.
Yes, that's it.
I'm going to put it on. Okay.
In the meantime, good morning, everybody. Thank you to ICOM Portugal for so kindly inviting me to be here and give a presentation. Thank you. And to take part in your discussions, as far as I can follow them, but it's usually pretty clear. And to share my own experiences that we had at the Cultural Heritage Agency with several pilot projects, and I will present them to you now. So it's about traces of slavery and colonial history in the museum collection. Let's see if I take this one. Yeah. I will first talk a bit about the background, and then I will present these two projects, which were pilot projects, which gives us the possibility to try out and to see what happens and to see then what can we do with these experiences. The first one was a research into the collection on traces of slavery and colonial history. And by that, I don't mean colonial collections. I mean objects in our collections that have a link with colonial history, that are related to that history. And I will show you some examples and how we made publications for the museum field. And the second project is ongoing at the moment, and that is about a trial again on provenance research, and I will tell you more later. The Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands is an expertise center. Let me try this a bit more like that. We are part of the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, and we deal in many ways with listed monuments, archaeology, cultural landscapes and movable heritage. And I am from the part of the movable heritage, of course, museum collections. The Cultural Heritage Agency manages also itself a part of the state collection, which is divided over almost 30 museums. And we have about 100 objects in our care, and those are mainly art objects, paintings, sculpture, drawings, applied art, and mainly Dutch art, actually. And the main purpose of us is to show this art elsewhere. We are not a museum, we don't have our own rooms, but we want to give them on loan to museums and also to ministries and embassies and the like. And the most, and a part of it, of course, we keep in a storage. And this is our brand new storage facility that has just been delivered in this summer. We share this storage together with 3 museums, the Rijksmuseum, which is the National Museum in Amsterdam, the Open Air Museum, and the Royal Palace Het Loo. And we have their collections, such as paintings, as you see here. The background is that we all see these developments in society. We are having a more and more diverse society. Many discussions are going on colonial past, on stereotypes. The Rijksmuseum organized this year an exhibition on slavery, which was really a good new step for this national museum, of course. There's a discussion about a new national museum on slavery in Amsterdam that might come in 2025. And museums are also critically reviewing their own collections and their own history of the museum. For example, the Mauritshuis in The Hague, or the Amsterdam Museum in the City Museum of Amsterdam. And we find that in our collection databases, in our collection inventories, there are descriptions and terms that we don't want anymore by now, that are outdated or incomplete or offensive or derogatory. And that is why, and these collections are online. I mean, anybody can see these terms also online. So we notice all over, and you here as well, we are going, there's a shift from a single-sided perspective to multiple viewpoints. And this is an international movement. This is a photo that I found on the internet from 2016 in the Natural History Museum in New York. Every year on Columbus Day, the people gather around the statue of Roosevelt outside, and then they go into the museum demonstrating and presenting alternative histories to the collection, not anymore the white suprematist point of view, but also other stories of other people. Decolonize the museum. So our first project, the pilot project on research into the collection, is again, as I said, traces with the colonial, links with the colonial past. And this is a new topic. It's not included in our collection data. It's looking with a new question into your collection. We don't find keywords in the, I call it the database. I mean collection registration, collection inventory, which is a database and it's usually online. The title or the description offers no leads. Usually it's an art historical description and it doesn't give you any connection with the past. Again, more than just the art historical collection description. And so that meant we had to go through our collection and develop a method. And we always work together with experts outside and we ask for input. We don't want to invent everything ourselves. Also because we are, of course, a government organization and we don't owe the truth. We want to collaborate with other people. So with the help of others, we compiled a list of search terms to go through our collection. We could search in sub-collections, for example, our collection of 17th and 18th century portraits. We went through the old inventory cards. Our collection was digitized in the 1980s, then by data typists who did not take all the information into the database. So you find more information sometimes still on the inventory cards. And you could look into artists of whom you know that they went, for example, to Brazil to paint there, or they painted in or worked in the Dutch Indies. So you can go for names of artists. And also use your eyes. Look, when you go through the storage, you really find things that you would have never expected that you would see, actually, because now you look with different eyes, in a different light. And we installed an advisory board. Our small team was, I think it was white and all 50 plus, I guess. So we wanted an advisory board of a diverse composition to help us and think along with us and advise us. And I would like to show you three objects, three paintings, and how they are described in how they were described in our database. And I think that gives you a clear indication already. This portrait of Adriana Burlamacchi, it's described as it's a woman watching to the right, and she has that dress. And then I translated into English and highlighted for you how the black person is described. It says a Negro boy in white, red striped coat and a silver collar. That's all. And the silver collar, of course, is a slavery collar. Owners used to give their dogs or their swans silver collars like that, and also probably an enslaved person. We don't know who this was and what his status was. This painting says, here we see a woman with blonde curly hair, and on the left a person in an orange coat. This was already a bit maybe more politically correct. I don't know when this was put into the database, but here it's a person, and if you would look for slavery, you would never find this portrait. And here we have a painting of Anna de Beije, and she's only the wife of Jacob van den Steen. And the black boy in the background, very hard to see, is not mentioned at all. So these are examples of portraits that have a direct link with slavery, but you won't find them in your collection just looking like that. And another example are these sugar casters, which have a one-on-one connection with slavery, colonial history, sugar plantations. These would be described in your database as Chinese porcelain with a silver top, maybe something about the form, and that's it. But this has a one-on-one connection with the sugar plantations and slavery. And if you would want to show these objects in your museum or make a publication on it, you would like to add an extra layer. It's not that we want to erase history, no, quite the contrary. We want to add extra layers of meaning, of stories to the collection, and then embrace other people, other stories as well. Just to show you an impression of these search terms we use, this is a fragment of the long list. I gathered them here. So we have slave, we use by now the word enslaved, and all the words that are related to that word, Moor, Negro, Marron, and servant. And while doing this research, our colleagues that worked in the storage or the other curators, it was for them an eye-opener too. And then the surprising thing is that we find other objects which have a link, like this fitting on a china cabinet, in which you see this figure with a feather headdress. Nobody had ever noticed it, but now that we have this new focus, we discover these things in our collection. So it is very much awareness raising to do such a research. And then we published our findings in an e-magazine in Dutch online, and this is the English translation in a PDF, which is also online, making a report of our research and adding a sort of virtual exhibition of 25 objects that we each had described by 3 different people to guarantee this multi-perspectivity. And I recommend you to have a look at it. It's nice to read, it's interesting, and it's very, very surprising how some people reflect on objects that we show there. And another following thing of this research, I will give you the numbers. It's a bit raw material. On 100,000 objects, we had about 1,900 findings, so to say. But then this list had to be analyzed and corrected, and we are still working on that. That is the handwork of the museum. That takes time. So what you want then is to enrich your collection information and adapt it where necessary, and give this more information in your database and add keywords to it so you can find it easily as a group. And then other people, we, the curators in our organization, but also people from outside, are most welcome to do research on these objects and go further. And as an example, this is a painting by the Dutch poet and painter Lucebert. It's called Sneeuwneger, Snow Negro. You hear, when I say it in Dutch, it has this internal rhyme, Sneeuwneger. You hear he's a poet. So we are sure that he was the one who gave the title to this painting. And we want to keep that. So that is why we decided we will put these titles between quotation marks, and we add a note that it was the painter who gave the title to this object. So thus, we are going through these findings and adding information, adding a remark on the title, adding more information on the person in the portrait, or adding context, etc. And this is superficial research, actually, that has to be done then. And we published just now in October a guide for museums. We are not talking really about the ethnographical museums who have their whole network themselves and their whole way of working already. We want to translate our findings for the smaller museums that have the same type of objects in their collection and which are rare birds, so to say. So we published this one, and in December we will have a first meeting on it, and thus we spread the information, and we help museums, and also if they need advice we can go there and help them. So that was the first pilot project and its consequences. Then my second one, on provenance research. We had an advice, well, you know, we are all talking about this now, restitution, how, when, what should you restitute, how should you do that, etc. In the Netherlands, we had a very good advice from the Council for Culture on colonial collections. So now I'm talking about colonial collections. And the three main conclusions they wrote in their advice was: first, acknowledge injustice, be generous in restitution when the object is looted or when it has eminent importance for the origin for the country of origin, and do the provenance research together with the country of origin. At the moment in the Netherlands, we are having an interim government, so we don't have an official policy yet. We have to wait for that. But in the meantime, we said we start with this pilot project just to taste how things are working. And because we wondered what actually happens. Imagine that there will be this policy and that our Minister of Culture will ask from the museums, just as was asked on the Jewish property between 1933 and 1948, what is the provenance, what do you know about this object, where does it come from, and should it go back? The same question might come on colonial collections. And then what does that mean for a normal museum, not an ethnographical museum? What does it mean? What do you need then? So our question was, what actually happens if you start such a research? And what would that mean for a museum? How much time does it take? And also, if you want to work together with the counterpart in the country of origin, how to work internationally, that's not so easy. We know that in ICOM. And our question was here not only the provenance, but also the positioning of the object. What is it? What does it mean? Does it have a strong religion meaning? Is it just tourist stuff? How should we weigh this object in the larger context of our collections and the collections in the country of origin? And we search independent researchers and ask them, please do 40 hours research. If you find enough reason to continue, if you expect to find more, make another 40 hours maximum, and then use 20 hours to write your reports and to keep a logbook. I kept a logbook myself as project manager, and it's amazing if you see how many steps you are doing, how many emails, how many phone calls, how many WhatsApp group, WhatsApp connections, the conversations, etc. So it gives you really the work on the floor, the insight of what's going on. I will come back to these objects that I show at the side here. We selected 6 objects, and they were colonial objects, but I put colonial right away between brackets, between quotation marks, because what does it mean, colonial? And often we found out this is not colonial at all. So the term in itself is already interesting. Objects from Asia, Congo, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Papua New Guinea. And I put Asia and India again between quotation marks because the religious objects you see here is described in our database as coming from Asia. But then what does that mean? Is it Thailand? Is it China? Is it Chinese, Dutch Indies? We don't know. And the same with these two textiles from India. What does it mean, India? It was inscribed in 1902 in a collection that came into our care from an artist. It was collected by an artist, and it said India. But at the time, what did India mean then? Was it Pakistan? Was it North India? Was it South India? So we need to know more ourselves first to start such a research. There were also 4 cannons from Indonesia, so we had a cluster here of objects, and a cup from the Kuba Kingdom in Congo, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. And our experiences were, well, I already showed some of it. First of all, how do you find specialists in the Netherlands and in the country of origin? Finding them in the Netherlands, I noticed you don't have specialists on each type of object. So in the end, we found a few specialists really, Oceania for the Papua New Guinea mask, and he's a very good one indeed, he knows everything. But we also found just good researchers, also researchers who worked in the Jewish research program. And then finding the counterpart in the country of origin, I mean, that takes really, really an effort. In the end, I found 2 of them. I'll come back to that. So, as I said, the first thing you should start with is do the research yourself. Find out what it is, where it comes from, and then you know whom to ask in a country of origin to be a counterpart in the research. And then if you find such a counterpart, then how do you define quality of research and reporting? I left it completely open. Also for the Dutch researchers, they asked me, how should I write my report? And I said, I don't know. And if you don't know, imagine you write it to me as a letter telling me about your findings. And that was helpful for them in any case. So, and then if you have people from the country of origin, they also use oral history. How do we weigh the information? What do we think of oral history? And what does it mean to respect another type of research, another way of thinking, etc.? So it also reflects very much on yourself, actually. In practice, we had a very positive response and a very good collaboration with the Dutch researchers. One of them lives in Taipei, in Taiwan. That's interesting in itself, because how does it work with a researcher located in another place in the world? And it was, I always stressed, please remember, no is also an answer. If you don't find anything or very little, that is an answer. Don't despair. That is also perfect. And then let me first go back to the objects to tell a little bit more, and then I'll finish. This mask from Papua New Guinea, it came into our collection with the legacy of a Dutch artist, and we had no idea about it. We knew it's from the CPEC area, and that's what we knew. And then our specialist right away said, haha, this is tourist stuff. It's nothing important, really. And I said, it's still interesting. I want you to find more about it. And he did. But this came into the collection of this artist in the 1960s, probably. He found it probably somewhere in Rotterdam, because he lived there. We don't know how. But, you know, we never knew this was just tourist stuff. For us, it could have been like a very important, unique thing from the 19th century that we should restitute right away. So that is also for us very eye-opening to do these types of research. This is an Igbo statue from Nigeria. Very hard to understand what it is. Is it unique because it is one piece by a tourist artist, or is it older? Well, we don't really know. I told you about this one in Asia, and the textiles the same, and the cannons. Here we had an Indonesian counterpart and an Indonesian living in the Netherlands doing the research for us in the Netherlands. And it was very helpful for me that she could interact with the Indonesian colleague. Also because internet connections were very hard. In the end, we tried to connect through WhatsApp. And then again, the connection, well, we had the same here. Connections can fail, and it can be hard to interact. And then, so what next? So, and here you see our Congolese researcher, who we found through an ICOM contact, actually, Terry Nyambe, who is on the board of ICOM International. And via, we found this researcher from Kinshasa, from the National Museum. And he flew into the country to Kananga, from Kinshasa to Kananga, and then at the back of a motorcycle 200 kilometers further to go into the area of the Kuba Kingdom. And there he spoke with notabilities, such as this person here, and he interviewed them. So this is also the part of the oral history. And with this man, it was a very good contact, actually. He spoke English fluently, and he was very easy in connecting with WhatsApp. And we made a group, the three of us, the Dutch researcher, he and myself. And so this was very fruitful, a very good example of collaboration. So what next? We started this research in June. I'm awaiting one more report now. And then next week we are having a meeting again with the researchers among themselves who will exchange their experiences with some people from the ministry and some other researchers from the world cultures and other institutions. So we want to share as much as possible this kind of information also. And then I have to decide upon my final report, will it be like all the reports together with all the logbooks and my findings? I mean, I have many. In my log, I typed in bold the things I thought, these are remarkable, so I can use them for my final report. And then we hope to, we will advise the policymakers on, what does it mean? What can we do now in the near future? It is clear that we need more research and expertise. That is very clear. And it was a successful project in the sense that we had many insights and we learned a lot, and we can use that for the future. And this is all before the question of restitution, just to make it clear. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anna. I think now we are 5 minutes late, not that much, but still I think we should go and have a coffee, and then we come back and restart our presentations. Sim. Aproveito para dar apenas duas informações práticas. Da parte da tarde, o encontro no Museu de Ciência, no Químico, será às 3h30. Será a partir daí que começará a nossa visita ao Museu de Ciência. E, entretanto, gostava de dar também uma outra informação prática que tem a ver com a disponibilização online, até ao final do ano, das atas dos encontros de museus de países e comunidades de língua portuguesa, que foram organizadas pelo ICOM nos anos 90, sendo o último em 2000, e todas essas comunicações que, apesar de ainda existirem em algum suporte de papel, já não estão disponíveis, vão passar a ser consultáveis a partir do site do ICOM. Dito isto, apresento o nosso orador seguinte, que é Guido Gryseels, diretor-geral do Museu Real de África Central, em Tervuren, na Bélgica, desde 2001. O museu possui algumas das maiores coleções mundiais de património cultural e natural de África, em particular da África Central. Este museu serviu como instituto colonial durante quase um século, mas durante os últimos 20 anos passou por um profundo processo de reforma e renovação, em colaboração com parceiros africanos e parceiros da diáspora africana. O museu está a participar ativamente no debate nacional e internacional sobre reconstituição e restituição de coleções. Guido Gryseels é atualmente presidente do grupo de diretores do Museu Europeu de Etnologia, é membro do Conselho de Administração da Agência Belga de Cooperação para o Desenvolvimento ENABEL e serve como presidente do seu Comitê Orçamental. Tem um doutoramento em Economia Agrícola e, antes de se tornar diretor-geral do Africa Museum, trabalhou para várias organizações internacionais no campo da investigação agrícola internacional. Guido, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, my thanks to the organizers of the meeting today for inviting me. And a special thanks to my friend Professor Antonio Ribeiro, who gave me a lift this morning from Lisbon, and for the interesting discussions we had about cultural Portugal on the way. What I'm going to talk to you about is about our museum and how we deal with restitution, what the different policies are in Europe. But before that, I'd like to say in a few words what our museum is about and why we are so central in the discussions. The origin of our museum is that in 1897, King Leopold, who had just acquired the Congo as his personal property after the Conference of Berlin, he organized an exhibition in Tervuren, the place where we now have our museum, where he had a castle, to promote the colonial activities that he was doing in the Congo. He wanted to convince the Belgian public that colonialism was a good thing, that he was there to civilize the people. He wanted to convince investors to invest in the Congo. So he organized a temporary exhibition in Tervuren, and at the same time he also brought 266 Congolese to Tervuren to put their villages around the lakeside to have their day-to-day lives there. Today we would call it the human zoo. And for those of you who would be in Belgium in the next few months, next week our museum is opening a big exhibition about human zoos in Europe in the 19th century. It was very much an international phenomenon, and we have a fantastic exhibition that opens this Monday about it. That exhibition was a big success, so that was the start of our museum in 1898. We started off as the Musée du Congo, and we were established really as a colonial institute. From the start, we were a research institute, but also we had a museum to organize the propaganda. Very quickly, the original building was too small, and King Leopold organized the construction of a new building that was opened in 1910. Just a few ideas. We're primarily a scientific institute. We have 230 members of staff, of which 80 scientists. Every day we have about 60 volunteers. And we do a lot of training. We have about 100 African scientists and museologists coming for training every year, but we also have about 60 PhD students that are enrolled at the Belgian University, but do their field work or their lab work or their study of collections with us. And this year we have 62, and our annual budget is about 18 million. This is just a view of our campus. We have 8 buildings, 60,000 square meters. In each one of the buildings you have the scientific research, we house our collections, our archives, and then the museum is, of course, our link with the public. What do we do in our museum? Well, first of all, we have enormous collections. We have among the largest collections on Africa in the world. We do research, and we have 4 big domains: anthropology, history, biology, and earth sciences. We have a lot of public services. Every year we organize 2 to 3 exhibitions, and we do a lot of dissemination of knowledge. We have a major program on sensitization, and we have a major program on national capacities in Africa, a development collaboration program. Quickly, what type of research do we do in cultural anthropology? Clearly, it's about our collections, about ethnography, but we also have a major section on linguistics, and in fact we are very active in Portuguese Africa. We have a lot of trainees from Portuguese Africa to come and study linguistics at our museum. And we also have a section on anthropology. And biology is primarily the taxonomy and the link between taxonomy and the transmission of diseases. In earth sciences, it's the traditional geology as well as natural risks. We develop early warning systems for volcano eruptions, for earthquakes, for ground movements. And then, of course, what is perhaps best known is our research on history and on politics. We have both colonial history and contemporary history. And these are some of the publications that we've recently published about the colonial past in Central Africa. One of the major activities of our museum is educational. Why? For most Belgian children, their first encounter with Africa is a visit of our museum. Now, we functioned for more than 100 years as a colonial institute, so more than 100 years we produced stereotypes, we sort of gave impressions of the colonial past as if it was nothing but a good thing. And so we've indoctrinated a lot of Belgians, and so now we're trying to set it right by organizing educational activities to give children a positive view on Africa. So we have specialized workshops for children from 4 to 17, workshops on colonial past, workshops on music, workshops on cultures, workshops on agriculture, depending on the demands of the school. We also have major cultural activities. We have a website. We have a publication program. Now, turning to our collections, as I said, we have some of the largest collections in the world on Africa. We have 125,000 ethnographical objects, primarily from Central Africa, 8,000 music instruments, 10 million zoological specimens, more than 4 kilometers of historical archives, more than 1 million photos and films, 8,000 historical maps. We have the largest collection on tropical wood samples of Africa in the world with 80,000 specimens, 15,000 minerals. Every year we have between 30 and 40,000 children in our workshops. As I say, they're primarily for schools, but they can also be followed properly. And then not only do we organize 2 to 3 exhibitions a year ourselves, we also do a lot of loans of our collections, and we contribute annually on average to about 30 exhibitions a year. What do we do? Well, first of all, of course, that collection management. They're very diverse. They range from ethnographical objects to archives to insects to animals. They have to be managed. And our ethnographic collection is 128,000, and they're very diverse. 70% is from Central Africa, 85,000 from the Congo, 2,300 from Rwanda, and 1,150 from Burundi. So it's primarily Congo, but we also have collections from Eastern Africa, from Western Africa, from Southern Africa. But at the moment, in our discussions on restitution, we particularly talk about the Congolese collections. Most of it was acquired before 1960, and 1,500 objects were acquired before 1908. That means that in the period that was Congo Free State, that was the private property of King Leopold. And in fact, most of the objects that were acquired before 1908 really have been acquired by violence or through plundering. Now, one misunderstanding that often exists is that not every object that we have is art. We don't have 128,000 art objects. I mean, in discussion of restitution, there is often a confusion on that. Most of the objects that we have are day-to-day objects like forks and knives and plates and cooking pots and fish nets because they were collected within the context of anthropological research to see how people lived. Not everything that we have are works of art. I think it's about 20 to 30,000 objects. 40% was registered after 1960, but that doesn't mean that they were actually collected after 1960. A lot of the collections that we've received after 1960 are donations, are gifts from people who used to work before in the Congo. We work across Africa, not only in Central Africa. Here you see we work in about 14 countries of Africa, where you see the blue dots. That means collaborations in the field of earth sciences. Red dots is collaboration in the field of biodiversity. And the yellow dots is collaboration in the field of human sciences and collaboration of museums. But before I go into the restitution issue, is that a few years ago we did a major renovation of our museum. The permanent exhibition of our museum had not changed till 1956, so the last major change in the exhibition was before 1960, before the independence of Congo. So in the international press, we were often labeled the last colonial museum in the world. So we did a major renovation. We redid the entire permanent exhibition on the basis of contemporary Africa, upon topics of importance to sustainable development, and with a very critical view of the colonial past. At the same time, we also renovated the entire museum building. And also, we want to have new infrastructure. We couldn't do that in a historic building because it's a protected monument, so the only way was to construct a new building here on the site, all in glass, which is built as a conference center, with on the first floor a restaurant, shop. There are meeting rooms, there's auditoria, and then that's connected with the museum through an underground gallery. The works took about 5 years, and we reopened at the end of 2018. Our first year was an enormous success with 360,000 visitors. Of course, then Corona came, and it's a bit less now, but we hope to go back to those numbers next year. This is just an overview of what the museum looks like now. You can start with the section on languages and music. Then Europea is about the history of African presence in Belgium. Contrary to Portugal and other European countries, Belgium never allowed Africans to come to Belgium except for when they were students. And 3 years ago, there were maybe 5,000 Belgians of African origin. Today, there's 250,000, but that's because of the migration wave. So Belgium has remained a white society a very long time, till about 20 years ago, and it now struggles in coming to terms with the multicultural society. A lot of questions are being asked about the colonial past. And so this is a gallery, Europea, done by African diaspora in Belgium and for African development. Then we have sections on landscapes and biodiversity, on resources. I mean, if Africa is so rich, why in resources, why is it still so poor? Then we have a section on the long history of Africa, on colonial history, and on rituals and ceremonies. And then in each corner of the museum, there's an interactive space. Here in Studio Rumba, you can teach yourself how to dance the rumba. Taxolab, you can teach about taxonomy. In imagery, basically, we show colonial pictures and films, but with a voiceover of Africans today. How do they look at these colonial images now? And Studio 6 Plus is a studio for children of 6 years old. So that's what the new museum looks like. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but this is an illustration of the new museum. In the galleries, rituals and ceremonies, which is about the important events in everybody's life: birth, marriage, going to school, education, social security, getting a job, and death. So it has modules on each one of them, and every time the African voice is central. We illustrate it with both historic collections and contemporary collections, primarily popular art. So we try to mix both of them. And our museum is now takes a very critical view of the colonial past. I mean, when we look at colonialism today, colonialism is a system of governments which is based on military occupation, on racist and authoritarian rule, and on exploitation of a country. So it's basically an immoral system. So we take distance of it. It has led to a lot of debates. Our renovation of museum has led to a lot of discussions about the role of Belgium in Africa and the role of Belgium in Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi in particular. We condemn colonial as a system, even though we still have respect for individual contributions, but we see our role as a museum as a forum for debate. Now, coming to the object that I was asked to talk about today is the object of restitution. It's a discussion which is not new. Here I refer to a speech of President Mobutu Sese Seko, who talked about that his country had been plundered of cultural heritage and he mounted the return of the artistic heritage to his country. He said that in 1973 in a speech for the United Nations. And why was that? At that time we had a traveling exhibition of our collections in the US. Millions of people went to visit that exhibition in the US, and Mobutu was asking, why is it that Americans can see those collections and that people in Congo cannot see those collections? So he wanted to have so that was the start of it. Our museum then returned symbolically 116 objects back to the Congo, but most of them were stolen a few years later. That shouldn't be an argument, but I do want to say that we tried to meet some of his demands of Mobutu, but it was not a very favorable experience. Incidentally, also in the negotiations of Belgium with Congo at independence in 1960, the situation of cultural heritage was also on the table. The Congolese wanted to ask the return of the objects that were in our museum, but in the end, the Belgians never allowed that to be on the agenda that was discussed, so nothing happened, but it was an issue that was very much alive already at that time. But Mobutu really kicked it off on the international front, and then in 2017, President Macron gave his speech in Ouagadougou, where he said that in a few years' time, we want to create conditions for a return of a large part of the African cultural heritage from Europe back to Africa. He said it was not normal that such a large proportion of the African cultural heritage was in museums in the West and in private hands in the West and really ought to go back, that young people in Africa had the right to have access to their own cultural heritage. He then asked Felwine Sarr and Benedict Savoy to write a report about restitution, who they also stressed that young people in Africa had a right to their own heritage, had a right to get access to it, and they advocated the return of cultural heritage to countries of origin. That's led to a lot of public debate. It's now on the top of the political agenda, and the first country actually that went very far in it was Germany. Germany in 2018 developed a strategic plan that gave priority to dealing with colonial collections, that advocated provenance research, and that advocated that provenance research should lead to online databases and ultimately to restitution. And Germany also put the mouse where, put the action where its mouth was. They provided a lot of money immediately to German museums to do that, that provenance research. For example, the National Ethnological Museum in Berlin immediately got 8 additional scientists, to do nothing but provenance research. Followingly, Germany then returned collections to Namibia, to Benin, and to other countries. They have this Benin dialogue, and I think in the next few weeks, Germany will return 524 collections from Benin to Nigeria. And then Germany also last year started a new initiative that perhaps you will be involved, or Portuguese Museum will be involved with next year, the Museum Lab. It's a program of collaboration between African museums and German museums. Last year they did it only for German museums, but as from next year they intend to widen up And they've asked museums in Belgium, in Holland, in France, I think also in Portugal, to participate in the Museum Lab. What does it involve? It involves inviting people from African museums to come and stay a few weeks or months at each one of the museums, be part of it, and really be information exchange. It's not a capacity strengthening program, it's not training. It starts from the premise, we have as much to learn from you as you have to learn from us. So that's the Museum Lab, and that will become a European initiative. France, you may have read in the papers that on the 9th of November, that's next week on Tuesday, France will return 26 objects to Benin. And at the same time, it's also investing heavily in the construction of 3 new museums in Benin, where progressively more collections will be transferred to as soon as the museums are sort of ready. And the Senate also prepares legislative framework for restitution. The Netherlands has had a clear restitution policy already, I think 30 years ago. They returned a large number of objects to Indonesia. They have recently published another report at Colonial Collection, the recognition of injustice. They invest a lot in provenance research, especially the Tropen Museum in Holland, but also the discussions that we heard in the presentation this morning about the provenance research that is currently taking place at many museums. And then in Belgium, recently our Secretary of State prepared legislation, and because of the bad condition of the museums in the Congo, Congo is a failed state. Korea built a new museum 2 years ago, but only built storage space for 12,000 objects when in fact there is 50,000 objects. And so a lot of the objects of Congo are kept in almost stables where it's sprayed inside, where a lot of problems of insects and so on. So our Secretary of State, he wants to give a sort of a decision of principle. He said anything that's been stolen or acquired by plundering automatically should become the legal owner of Congo. So when an object is proven that was stolen, that was acquired by plundering, automatically it will become the property of the Congo, and then it's up to the Congo to decide can it stay in Belgium or under what conditions, or should it return to Congo immediately. It's up to the Congolese to decide. And so that's a proposal that has been developed in our legal advice, and in 2 weeks' time our Secretary of State will be traveling to the Congo to discuss with the Congolese on how to organize that exactly. I mean, there should be a joint Congo-Belgian commission. We will do the provenance research, give the results of that research to that commission, and they'll then decide which one should become the legal ownership of Congo and which one should remain our ownership. Our museum, for a long time, has taken a very open and constructive attitude. We recognize that a large part of our collections have been acquired in a situation of unequal exchange, even though that's very difficult to define. I mean, it's easy to say that object has been stolen or has been acquired by plundering. That's the easy part. But then we also recognize that part of our collection have been acquired in an unequal exchange, and for that you need the provenance research. A lot of our collections were acquired by missionaries or by scientists or by civil servants, and then the problem is that you never really know how did they acquire it. I mean, a lot of the missionaries, you know, they acquired these objects, but what did they give in return? Did they pay for it? Did they say, we will say you a little prayer, we will build a school? We don't really know. Provenance can sometimes give the answer, but sometimes it will not give the answer, and so that's very difficult. Also, we're not owners of our collection. The ownership is the Belgian state, so it's a political decision, and it's up to the political authorities to make that decision. One thing that we're doing already now is facilitate access to our inventory. I mean, all of our collections, 128,000 collections, are registered in the TMS system, the museum system, and we've given both Rwanda and Congo direct access to our TMS system, so they can see exactly what we have in our collection, and so that facilitates the dialogue with it. We're also certainly in favor of physical restitution of symbolic objects of big importance, and we've reinforced cooperation with museums in Central Africa. We're also invested in provenance research, and we hope to expand that considerably in the next year. We have a pilot program on the return of cultural heritage in digital forms. With Rwanda, we have an agreement that we are, at the moment, digitizing all of the archives, historical archives of Rwanda that are in Belgium, not only in our museum, but also at Foreign Affairs and at the State Archives, that we digitize them and return them to Rwanda. We've already gone a long way in that. We also digitized all the photos, all the films, all our geological archives. They've already gone back to Rwanda, but we need 2 more years to find it. Now, an important part is that the Congolese, they don't talk so much about restitution, they talk about reconstitution. What do they mean with that? Restitution is a process where an object was acquired illegally and sort of that is returned as a sort of repatriation that is returned to the country of origin. Reconstitution is a different mindset. In Congo, they say, we still have a lot of cultural heritage in our country. I mean, there's still about 50,000 objects in Congo, but we would like to have a representative set, a representative collection of each artistic style of Congo. Now, Congo has about 300 ethnic groups that most of them have their own artistic styles. You have the Kuba, you have the Lega, you have the Chokwe, you have different styles, and each one, Congo would like to have a representative sample of each one of those collections. Some they have already, some they don't have. And so in their discussions with us, they don't focus on, yeah, but you've acquired it illegal, or they acquired. What is it that we need in Congo, and can we find ways and means that you return those objects as a matter of priority? And I'll give some examples later on. They also want strengthening capacity and assistance in building storage space. With some African museums, we also organize traveling exhibits. We have a big exhibit on the Bantu that we're doing with the Musée des Civilisations Noires in Dakar. And as I say, we're open for dialogue, we're open for collaboration, and that is really our major drive. Now, coming back to our Secretary of State, and he said anything that has been acquired by violence or by plundering should automatically become the ownership of the Congolese government. And here is 3 examples of sort of plundering, and we show them in our museum. We have an Ekisi Kondo statue that was acquired by a Belgian merchant after he had a conflict with the village chief, and he then burned down the village, stole all the objects that belonged to the chief, and they were returned to Belgium, and this is one of them that is in our museum. Then this is probably one of the most famous objects in the world. It's been an emblematic symbol of our museum. It's world famous. It's a Luba mask that was acquired by Michaud. Michaud was military also. He was in Congo to basically make sure that people listened to the colonial rulers and to delineate the sort of frontiers. One village didn't want to listen, so he burnt it down. People went and left, and then he stole the objects of the chief. And this is this Luba mask, which now is one of the most famous masks in the world. And that, we have to admit, too, was acquired by plundering. Then there's Lusinga, is also a statue that belonged to a Congolese village chief in Boma, who got into conflict with Belgian military in the end of the 19th century. All these 3 are from the end of the 19th century. He burned down the village, killed the village chief, chopped off his head. The skull was sent back to Belgium and was in our museum about 30 years ago, and then we transferred it to another museum. And then he also stole all the objects of the chief, because that was also a symbolic action. By taking the objects that belonged to the village chief, you also took his power away. And so it was not just the object that we were interested in, they were also interested in taking the power away from the village chief. On provenance research, we're conducting some of it already. We also have a provenance tour. If you visit our museum now, we've installed an app that you can download on your telephone. And with that app, you can follow from most of the objects that in our museum what their provenance is, how they came to us, how they were brought there, in what situations they were acquired. So that's the provenance tour of our museum. Now, provenance, we just heard from experience in the Netherlands. It's something that takes a lot of effort. We've looked at, when an object, if we have the archives, on average it takes about 2 weeks full time from a scientist. But very often the archives won't tell you the full information. That means that you will need to do full field research, that you are depending on oral research, and then of course it can take months. The research, for example, that we conducted on these 3 objects took more than 6 months of field research of 3 scientists. So you can imagine what it takes to do all that on 85,000 objects. So that's the provenance tour that we now have in our museum. Then we collaborate closely with the National Museum in Congo. They've organized a few conferences already about what they now call reconstitution. They don't talk about restitution as such. Also, the president of Congo has said, yeah, restitution, but that's something for the long time. We have to put our own house in order yet. 2 years ago, Congo opened its first national museum. It was built by the Koreans. It's a nice museum, but as I say, there's one thing that they overlooked, and that was the need for storage space. So that's still a major problem there. And we're discussing with Congolese now a major program that involves reconstitution, that involves restitution, but also that involves strengthening national capacity. That means building storage space, training people in collection management, restoration, educational activities, and so on. This is an interesting example of reconstitution. What you see here are kakungu. They're from the Yaka in Congo. They're very famous masks. They call them giant masks. They're very rare. They belong to the Yaka in Congo. Worldwide, there's about 24 of them that are known, and our museum has 18 of them, and the 6 others are either in European Museum or in the US. In Congo, there's none of this one anymore. They don't have any collections from the Yaka that relate to these giant masks. So when Congo talks about reconstitution, that's what they're asking. They say, we don't care how you acquired them, but we would like to have some Yaka masks in our own collection to show them in our museum. And obviously, we will be doing that. This is... This is a picture of how most of the collections are stored at the moment in the Congo. It's basically in stables where it rains inside, where you have a lot of problems of diseases and infestations. And so when Congo talks about collections, that's the first thing they ask as improvement in storage space. It's really their first objective at the moment is that should improve. We're also, in the last couple of years, we've done several workshops both in Congo and in Rwanda on restoration and collection management together with the Académie des Beaux-Arts. So when we talk about restitution or reconstitution, we also talk about program of capacity strengthening in the Congo, and also in Rwanda we have a major program as well. As I say, this is a picture of me and then the Director General of the National Museums of Rwanda, where I hand over officially the hard disk with all the inventories of collections that we have on Rwanda. And then last week, our museum, together with the State Archives, published 2 volumes on the guidelines to colonial archives in Belgium. So basically, this list is a comprehensive database of all the collections on the colonial past or all the archives on the colonial past that are available in Belgium, no matter where, state archives, tervuren, provincial museums, missionary posts, they're all listed here. And that's available now both online and through purchases. Now, what are now the next steps in the restitution debate for Belgium? I'll be accompanying our Secretary of State when he goes to Congo from 23 to 27 November. That should lead to establishment of a Congo-Belgian commission. Then you may have heard also that our parliament has established a special parliamentary commission on the colonial past. And they've asked a group of experts to write a report. That report has just been published. It's available online from our parliament. And that discusses not only what really happened in the colonial past, what violence was used, to what extent has colonial past led to a number of societal problems today, like racism, like restitution, like dealing with Africans in Belgium. They suffer a lot from racism, from not finding a house, from discrimination. And so in the next year, the Parliament will organize hearings in Parliament to deal with each one of those issues. And restitution has a full chapter in that report. It was written by Sarah van Beurzen, who's a very renowned expert on restitution issues from University of Ohio. And as I say, for those of you who read French, the report is available online from our Parliament. Then there's the big issue of unequal exchange. I mean, those objects that were acquired through plundering or through violence, that's easy, they should go back. But how do you define an equal exchange? How do you know on what conditions an object was acquired? We know from each one of our objects in our database, we know exactly when something was collected, where it was collected, by whom it was collected, how it was brought to Belgium, and the whole, basically its entire life history is documented, but very often what we don't know is what did the person who acquired it give in return? Did he pay? Did he promise? Did he get it as a gift? Was the gift voluntary, not voluntary? That's a big thing. And then the issue is also to whom return. Is it state to state, or should it go back to the source communities? Or should it go back to the national museums? I mean, in the case of the 3 objects that I showed, for example, the source communities, they say, we would like to have it back because it played an important role in our society. And we're not interested for the object to come back to then be shown in a museum 2,000 kilometers away. So that's a very difficult discussion. And then, of course, there's the issue of the role of diaspora. We have a lot of people of African origin now in Belgium. They have a say in this, but to what extent that still is to be defined. With that, I'm going to finish my presentation. Let me remind you once again that next week our museum is opening a major exhibition on zoomins, on human zoos, about colonial exhibitions in the primarily the 20th and 19th century, how they brought in then very often people from Africa who set up their day-to-day lives, and how it's led to a lot of the problems of racism in the society today. With this, I'd like to thank the organizers and
Vamos então agora avançar para a nossa última comunicação de hoje, para depois então termos o nosso momento de debate. E o orador que se segue, aqui o meu papel, é o Luís Pérez Arminho, a quem eu peço que chegue até aqui, que é licenciada em História e em Antropologia Social e Cultural, e depois de ocupar vários cargos no Museu Nacional de Cerâmica, em Valência, Espanha, e no Museu do Traje, Centro de Investigação do Património Etnológico de Madrid. É atualmente o responsável pelas coleções africanas no Museu Nacional de Antropologia de Madrid. Nesta posição, coordenou exposições sobre temas africanos e participou em reuniões e cursos, especialmente sobre as relações entre Espanha e Guiné Equatorial durante o período colonial. Também produziu várias publicações sobre este tema, tomando como referência as coleções do Museu, sobre o agora extinto Museu de África, em Madrid. Além disso, desde 2020, que é secretário do ICOM Espanha. Obrigada, Luís.
Obrigado. Gracias, sobre todo, a ICOM Portugal por la invitación para participar en estas jornadas. Se junta un poco, yo soy miembro de ICOM España y además responsable de las colecciones africanas del Museo Nacional de Antropología. Y es verdad que en España, cuando hablamos de restituciones, cuando hablamos de colecciones extraeuropeas, estamos un poco todavía comenzando a trabajar, por no decir que estamos en los inicios para estudiar este tipo de fondos y por qué tenemos un museo, por ejemplo, el Museo Nacional de Antropología, dedicado a solo fondos que vienen de fuera de Europa. Normalmente siempre decimos, y se ha dicho a lo largo de esta mañana, que los museos no son neutrales. La antropología no es inocente, los museos de antropología son todavía menos inocentes y desde el museo hemos asumido esa premisa para tratar de investigar nuestra propia historia y que nos ayude a comprender un poco más cuál es el origen de estas colecciones y, sobre todo, el gran reto al que nos enfrentamos ahora mismo es qué hacer con estas colecciones y qué servicio social nos puede proporcionar este tipo de fondos. Por eso, sí que me gustaría comenzar haciendo un muy breve resumen de cuál es la historia de este museo, porque es un museo muy peculiar, pero que sin embargo es muy característico de cómo entendemos o cómo hemos entendido en Europa al otro, al africano, al americano, al asiático. Normalmente, cuando hablamos de la historia del museo, las publicaciones que hay al respecto, siempre se tiende a hacer una división clásica, de acuerdo a las diferentes denominaciones, los diferentes títulos que el museo ha tenido a lo largo de su historia. Sin embargo, yo, por resumir, lo voy a hacer en dos partes, dos épocas muy diferenciadas. El Museo Nacional de Antropología tiene su origen en 1875. Lo funda un doctor, un médico. Y es que tenemos que tener en cuenta que en España la antropología no es una disciplina como la conocemos ahora, sino que nace asociada a los médicos. De hecho, este primer museo de 1875 es llamado el Museo Anatómico y es una especie de gabinete de curiosidades, un gabinete de antigüedades en el que sobre todo se muestran objetos anatómicos. Por ejemplo, el doctor Velasco, el fundador, era un gran coleccionista de muestras anatómicas, sobre todo de muestras anatómicas con deformidades. Era típico del siglo XIX, típico de esa época, este tipo de medicina que estaba también dando sus primeros pasos. Y curiosamente, junto a esos restos anatómicos, el museo ya muestra algunas evidencias de otras culturas no europeas. Cuando el doctor muere, en 1882, el Estado español asume la titularidad de ese museo, pero en vez de mantenerlo como un museo autónomo, lo integra dentro del Museo Nacional de Ciencias Naturales. A mí me parece un giro también muy interesante, porque en cierto modo vuelve a entender que esos restos anatómicos, pero también todos esos objetos asociados a culturas no europeas, no merecen estar dentro de un museo de arte, de un museo de arqueología, sino que tiene que estar en un museo de ciencias naturales. Es decir, el africano, el asiático, el americano son concebidos como productos de la naturaleza frente a la visión de un europeo que, al estar en un estado ya superior de civilización, formaría parte de otros centros, de otros museos. Es una visión bastante característica de la Europa de principios del siglo XX, y España en eso no fue ajena. Muchas veces, antes lo comentaba, en España, precisamente por sus características históricas, en el siglo XX España prácticamente había perdido ya su imperio colonial, se ha asumido muchas veces que España ha colonizado muy bien, que éramos unos grandes colonizadores, que lo que hacíamos mal era descolonizar, pero en el fondo todos los pueblos con los que España había civilizado habían tenido la enorme suerte de que lo hubiesen hecho los españoles. Era una visión muy normal. Y dentro de esa visión predominaba precisamente esa visión evolucionista, en el sentido que los españoles entendían que su misión era civilizar a estos pueblos para que llegasen al menos a algún grado cercano a la civilización europea. Todo este entramado de esa visión del ser humano, el africano, el americano y el asiático, como un objeto de la naturaleza fuera de la cultura, empieza a cambiar a partir de 1910, cuando el museo, digamos que se independiza. El museo adquiere autonomía y ya pasa a ser un museo de antropología, pero también de prehistoria, porque volvemos a lo mismo. Esos objetos asociados a las culturas extraeuropeas siempre son consideradas en el sentido de primitivos actuales que estarían a la altura de los objetos prehistóricos que se han encontrado en España. Y esta visión fue la que llegó a la Guerra Civil Española. Normalmente, cuando los profesionales de museos, cuando estudiamos la historia de los museos en España, siempre hemos asumido que después de la Guerra Civil, cuando se instaura en España el régimen franquista, con unos primeros años claramente asociados a una dictadura fascista muy alineada con los principios del régimen nazi o del fascismo italiano, siempre asumimos que no hay una política de museos. Y sí que existe una política de museos que además está encaminada a ensalzar las grandes glorias del pasado español. Y en ese sentido, ese antiguo Museo de Antropología y Prehistoria cambia su denominación para pasar a llamarse un Museo Nacional de Etnología. Es muy interesante leer el decreto que crea ese museo o leer la guía que se publica para hacer la visita a ese museo, porque se insiste una y otra vez que España ha tenido una labor colonizadora excepcional, que ha sido buenísima, que ha sido un ejemplo que todos los demás países europeos deberían haber seguido, porque en el fondo España había tenido la enorme suerte de poder cristianizar y civilizar a todos los pueblos con los que había entrado en contacto. Y qué mejor que esos pueblos cristianizados y colonizados, que ellos, para ser testimonio de esa gran labor misionera, de esa gran labor civilizatoria que habían realizado los españoles, y de ahí se crea este Museo Nacional de Etnología, que tiene una distribución espacial. Su arquitectura es muy característica porque es un museo pequeño. Solo tiene 3 salas que se reparten en 3 pisos, y este museo lo que hace es que dedica cada piso a cada estado evolutivo, empezando desde lo más primitivo hasta bajar a lo más civilizado. Por supuesto, los españoles no entraban dentro de ese esquema porque estaban fuera de él. De hecho, en esa época, un poco antes, se crea el museo paralelo, que es el Museo del Pueblo Español. Es decir, por una parte tenemos un museo dedicado a las culturas extraeuropeas, pero a la vez se crea un museo, el del pueblo español, dedicado a las culturas españolas. Nunca llegaron a estar unidos. Nunca se planteó la posibilidad de que un museo dedicado a la cultura, a la civilización, dedicado a la antropología, pudiese tratar como objeto de estudio lo español, porque entraba fuera de la lógica del pensamiento de ese momento. Esa situación sí que cambia ya a partir de los años 60 del siglo XX, cuando muchos antropólogos que se han formado, sobre todo en América, empiezan a regresar a España, empiezan a volver y a ocupar puestos en la universidad, y el museo empieza a encaminarse un poco en la línea de la antropología, más actual, más moderna, hasta que llega a una de las fechas clave, que es 1993. En ese año, y dentro de todo un programa tenemos que tener en cuenta que en 1992 son las Olimpiadas de Barcelona o la Expo de Sevilla, España se está abriendo al mundo y quiere mostrar su cara más amable después de un periodo de transición de 40 años de dictadura y decide crear un gran Museo Nacional de Antropología que debía unir las culturas españolas con las culturas extraeuropeas que estaban en el Museo Nacional de Etnología. El propósito era muy bueno, de hecho era un museo muy avanzado para su tiempo y un museo que ya empezaba a entender cómo iba a ser la sociedad española. Cómo España había pasado de ser un país, por ejemplo, emigrante, a ser un país que empezaba a acoger grupos de inmigrantes que venían de otros ámbitos culturales. Sin embargo, en una dinámica que hoy en día mantenemos, ese museo nunca llegó a existir como tal. El Museo Nacional de Etnología continuó su vida independiente, nunca se dedicó a cuestiones españolas y el Museo del Pueblo Español básicamente quedó en el abandono, nunca llegó a abrir al público y de hecho hoy en día se llama Museo del Traje, pero no tiene ninguna exposición ni en ningún momento se dedica a las culturas españolas. De hecho, es un museo que prácticamente es un poco una ironía, una paradoja, está condenado a luchar contra su propio olvido. A partir del año 93 es cuando se inicia ese proceso de remodelación e incluso un replanteamiento conceptual del museo. Los responsables del Museo Nacional de Antropología, porque el antiguo Museo Nacional de Etnología sí que asume el nombre del Museo Nacional de Antropología, entienden que hay que cambiar la orientación, que hay que cambiar los discursos, que tenemos que dejar de mostrar a las otras culturas como burbujas exóticas de algo muy lejano a lo nuestro y que hay que empezar a plantear discursos en los que empecemos a entender que vivimos en una sociedad global. De hecho, el museo tiene como subtítulo el Museo de la gente como nosotros, porque hace un juego en castellano en el que se utiliza el nosotros, que nos engloba a todos, pero poniendo ese signo más para decir, oye, este museo está dedicado a nosotros, pero también a los otros porque todos formamos parte de lo mismo, formamos parte de la misma cultura, de una misma sociedad global. Y en este momento es cuando estamos inmersos en este proceso de readaptación. Antes de hablar un poco de cuáles son las acciones que se están llevando a cabo desde el museo, sí que me gustaría, ya que estamos hablando un poco de toda esta cuestión colonial, que veamos un poco de dónde vienen las colecciones del Museo Nacional de Antropología, que son colecciones que vienen determinadas por su procedencia geográfica y que están en estrecha relación con la historia colonial española. Una de las primeras colecciones que tenemos, que es más destacada y que ocupa la primera parte del museo en la actualidad, es la de colecciones asiáticas. Y yo creo que es bastante evidente cuando se entra en el museo que en torno a un patio central tenemos toda la colección correspondiente a Filipinas y al fondo, en una pequeña sala, hay un espacio dedicado a las religiones orientales. ¿Por qué es esto así? Pues porque estas colecciones filipinas provienen de la antigua colonia española de las Filipinas y de una exposición que tuvo lugar en el Parque del Retiro en Madrid en 1887. Todavía hoy es muy curioso cómo cuando hablas con público, cuando hablas con ciudadanos de a pie de la calle, se sorprenden que en España hubo zoos humanos. Eso era algo impensable hasta el momento. España nunca podía haber hecho eso y sin embargo se hizo. Y de hecho en el Parque del Retiro hay un gran lago que hoy en día se utiliza pues, con unas barcas que puedes alquilar y remar un poco, que se construyó para que los filipinos que fueron llevados a Madrid pudiesen allí remar con las canoas. Incluso se llevó a una comunidad procedente de Ghana, de los Asanti, y se anunciaba en prensa que una de las mujeres que había llegado estaba embarazada y se anunciaba cuál era el día previsto del parto para que el público pudiese asistir. De hecho, también en el Parque del Retiro hubo una exposición dedicada a los inuit, procedentes del Ártico de Canadá. Ahí sí que he de decir que el Museo Nacional de Antropología, en colaboración con la Embajada de Canadá, ha procedido a una restitución simbólica de una serie de fotografías en las que se han identificado a algunos personajes inuit y se han puesto en contacto con las familias actuales, con los descendientes, y se les ha facilitado las copias de esas fotografías para que las tengan. Pues este es el origen de estas colecciones asiáticas. Es verdad que tenemos una importante colección dedicada a las religiones orientales, pero casi todas venían de otro museo y fueron a parar a antropología en ese momento. En cuanto a las colecciones africanas, que digamos es el otro gran grupo, también se pone en estrecha relación con la historia colonial española. En 1898, cuando España pierde Filipinas, pierde Cuba, lo que en el imaginario español es el gran desastre del 98, determinados grupos de presión coloniales intentan revivir esa idea del imperio español en África. Bueno, nunca llegó a obtener mucho el respaldo público, porque en ese momento las autoridades españolas básicamente no podían asumir esas aventuras coloniales, pero no deja de ser significativo que la colección básicamente proviene de dos ámbitos. Uno de ellos es de Marruecos. Marruecos siempre ha sido muy importante en la historia de España y fue protectorado español hasta el año 56. De hecho, Marruecos siempre formó parte fundamental hasta el punto que la guerra civil comenzó en Marruecos, la guerra civil española. Y el otro ámbito es el del Golfo de Guinea, lo que sería hoy Guinea Ecuatorial, la República de Guinea Ecuatorial, y ahí en ese momento estamos hermanados un poco con Portugal, ¿no? Porque es Portugal que a través de un tratado cede a España la isla de Fernando Po, lo que es hoy Bioko, y los territorios del río Muni, lo que conforman hoy la parte continental de Guinea Ecuatorial. España realmente nunca mostró un interés por ocupar de manera efectiva esos territorios hasta que se produce el desastre con la pérdida de Cuba y de Filipinas, y en ese momento una serie de expediciones que en la historiografía española se conocen como científicas recorren el territorio de Guinea Ecuatorial, realmente estudiando cuáles son las posibilidades para explotar económicamente estos territorios, y cuando regresan a España regresan con objetos, con colecciones, sobre todo de las culturas que habitaban la zona, como los Fan o los Bubi, ¿no? Cuando finaliza la Guerra Civil y volviendo a esa política de ensalzar las glorias españolas, se decide crear un Museo de África incluso, y ese Museo de África debía explicar un poco a los españoles cuáles eran las ventajas de mantener unos territorios coloniales cuando ya la descolonización ya empezaba a iniciar su camino, ¿no? Y de hecho hubo una expedición en el año 1948 cuyo objetivo era básicamente recoger colecciones para poder dotar al Museo de África de esos fondos. Sin embargo, el Museo de África, curiosamente, cuando Guinea Ecuatorial accede a la independencia, el Museo de África se cierra y todos esos fondos pasan a ingresar en el Museo Nacional de Antropología. El otro gran grupo de las colecciones son las americanas. En este caso sí que son unas colecciones que no están sujetas a esa sospecha colonial, porque aquí sí que habría que hacer un pequeño paréntesis, y es que en Madrid existe un Museo de América. Un Museo de América que se considera que debe ser único, que debe abordar de una manera particular y singular las relaciones entre España y América. Y es un museo que se crea, lo mismo, en 1941, no sé si lo conocen, pero es muy elocuente su arquitectura, porque realmente cuando el arquitecto diseña ese museo, lo que hace es construir, a imitación, un convento típico de la arquitectura virreinal española. Y a día de hoy el museo está en un edificio que trata de recrear un convento de la España o de la América española. Sin embargo, en el Museo Nacional de Antropología, las colecciones americanas casi todas proceden de trabajo de campo antropológico realizado con posterioridad o en momentos en que ya no había una relación colonial y eran trabajos científicos, con lo cual estas colecciones siempre están un poco exentas de la polémica que puede acompañar al resto. Ahora bien, tenemos muy claro cuál es el origen, tenemos en cierto modo, conocemos bien de dónde vienen nuestras colecciones, pero evidentemente nos enfrentamos a los retos de cualquier museo de antropología en la actualidad, porque tenemos unas colecciones de un momento muy determinado, de una cronología muy específica y de un ámbito geográfico muy concreto. Y sin embargo, la pregunta que nos hacemos toda la gente que trabajamos en el museo es ¿cómo podemos dar valor a esas colecciones para que puedan ser útiles socialmente a la actual sociedad española e incluso a la actual sociedad global? Evidentemente surgen las alternativas, ¿no? Como pues, las propuestas más estéticas, ¿no? Generar museos de arte extraeuropeo o incluso simplemente abordar la historia del museo y hacer un museo sobre su propia historia. Nos parece insuficiente, realmente nos parece que nos quedaríamos cortos y que necesitamos reconvertir este museo a través de una serie de acciones para que pueda ser útil y que sirva tanto a la sociedad española, pero también, por ejemplo, a las comunidades que ahora mismo también están en España y que son muchas. La exposición permanente mantiene una visión realmente peculiar, porque sí que se ha abandonado esa visión evolucionista de la cultura, pero se ha optado por una visión geográfica. De tal manera que si entras al museo, las 3 plantas, cada una de ellas representa un continente: América, África, Asia, y curiosamente no hay una planta que se dedique a Europa o ni siquiera a España. No tenemos, no hay una planta dedicada a eso. Y a la vez tú puedes hacer una visita en vertical, porque las colecciones se organizan de acuerdo con temas muy concretos: la vivienda, el ocio, la indumentaria, las creencias, porque se pretende que el público que vaya enseguida pueda reconocer esas referencias y que establezca una comparación entre lo que él vive y cómo se muestra en el museo. Yo cuando entré a trabajar allí siempre me llamó mucho la atención la sala de África, que tiene un área dedicada a indumentaria. No sé, el mensaje era como los africanos se visten. Bien, me parecía curioso, podía tener su punto incluso anecdótico, pero realmente no nos decía nada. Por eso la importancia de empezar a trabajar en esa remodelación de la permanente en la que empecemos a tratar otros temas y otras cuestiones. Ahora bien, mientras llevamos a cabo ese tipo de labores, sí que podemos recurrir a las exposiciones temporales. Y es un poco en la línea en que ahora mismo estamos trabajando con 2 acciones paralelas o con 2 estrategias paralelas. Una de ellas son las exposiciones que llamamos con voz propia. En esas exposiciones invitamos a artistas actuales que tienen su origen o que proceden de esas comunidades que tratamos en los museos a que dialoguen con las colecciones. De hecho, incluso muchas veces se les pide que ocupen el espacio de la exposición permanente, introduciendo su obra al lado de esas colecciones coloniales. Voy a hablar 2 ejemplos muy breves. Este primero de aquí es una exposición dedicada al arte tigua. Es una manifestación artística que se desarrolla en Ecuador a partir de los años 70 del siglo XX, tomando como referencia manifestaciones artísticas tradicionales. Desde el museo lo que se hizo fue trabajo de campo en Ecuador y allí se contactó con artistas que desarrollan este tipo de trabajos sobre caballete y se les invitó a exponer en el museo. Y aquí, en este caso, esta persona de espaldas es Alfredo Toaquiza, uno de los principales representantes de este tipo de arte. Él se le invitó, pintaba en medio de la sala de exposición temporal mientras estaba abierto al público, manteniendo un diálogo con la gente que visitaba la exposición. En este otro caso, La exposición estuvo centrada en Guinea Ecuatorial y aquí no pudimos invitarlo porque desgraciadamente había fallecido anteriormente, pero decidimos organizar una exposición sobre Fernando Nguema. Fernando Nguema fue un escultor muy reconocido en Guinea Ecuatorial que, tomando muchas referencias de la tradición cultural de su país, elaboró una producción escultórica muy curiosa. De hecho, esta sería su visión particular de este tipo de estatua, de este tipo de talla, que es la tradicional de los Fan en Guinea Ecuatorial. ¿Cómo planteamos esa exposición? Pues por una parte, la colección del museo la presentamos recreando un gabinete colonial, o como creíamos que sería un gabinete colonial, pero al lado expusimos la obra de Fernando Nguema como si fuese una galería artística contemporánea. Uno de nuestros grandes reclamos es que los artistas africanos, los artistas americanos empiecen a ocupar los museos de arte contemporáneo en España y no tengan que recurrir a los museos de antropología. Y por último, otro ejemplo es el de esta exposición, dentro de un ciclo que se llama Démosle la vuelta al mundo. Vamos a dar la vuelta al mundo y que pretende homenajear la primera vuelta alrededor del mundo que finaliza precisamente ahora en 2021, que fue en 1521, protagonizada por Magallanes y Elcano. De hecho, hemos recuperado el nombre de Magallanes en portugués, porque es portugués, evidentemente, pero nos cuesta al público todavía explicarle que era, lo voy a decir fatal, lo siento, Magallanes y no Magallanes, ¿no? Y lo hemos recuperado. Y esta exposición lo que hace, a lo largo de 3 años, es recalar en los diferentes puntos donde viajó esa expedición. Por ejemplo, en este caso, esta exposición trata de recrear la llegada de Magallanes a Brasil. Y en vez de recurrir a la típica exposición sobre arte tradicional brasileño o arte indígena, entre comillas, brasileño, lo que hicimos fue invitar a los museos comunitarios de Río de Janeiro a que organizasen ellos una exposición en nuestro museo. Actualmente estamos preparando, por ejemplo, una exposición sobre las Islas Marianas, por eso no pude estar ayer. Y en esa exposición estamos no solo tratando de investigar o de ver cómo fue el impacto de la llegada y de la colonización española de las islas, sino también entender cuáles son los retos actuales de las Islas Marianas y Guam, que están luchando un poco contra la hegemonía cultural de Estados Unidos, porque, claro, son 2 bases militares fundamentales para Estados Unidos en el Pacífico. Y otra de las exposiciones que tenemos previstas es sobre Cabo Verde. ¿Y por qué Cabo Verde? Porque fue el último punto donde llega la expedición de Magallanes y Elcano antes de volver a España y, curiosamente, uno de los primeros movimientos migratorios que llegan a España es el de caboverdianos. Caboverdianos que en los años 70 y 80 llegan primero a Portugal y de Portugal, cuando van hacia Europa para buscar trabajo, de repente encuentran ese trabajo en las minas del norte de España. Y hay una comunidad caboverdiana importantísima en las montañas del norte de España y queremos hacer una exposición rindiéndoles homenaje y recuperando esa historia migratoria. La otra línea de trabajo tiene el nombre de Personas que migran, objetos que migran. En este caso, invitamos a comunidades inmigrantes que han llegado a Madrid, a España, para que ellos expliquen a través del museo cuál ha sido su experiencia migratoria, cómo ha sido todo ese proceso desde que deciden que tienen que emigrar de sus lugares de origen hasta que llegan a España, en este caso concreto a Madrid. Cada uno de estos proyectos, hasta el momento hemos desarrollado 2, son muy largos, son muchos años de trabajo porque trabajamos con las comunidades implicadas y colaboramos con ellas, pero en última instancia, al final, la decisión sobre cómo quieren que sea la exposición es de ellos. En este caso, estuvo dedicada a las comunidades de Ecuador y esta última estuvo relacionada con las comunidades de senegaleses. De hecho, en esta foto es un grupo de senegaleses, de una asociación de inmigrantes senegaleses, que están trabajando en una sala que dedicamos a una exposición sobre cómo es el proceso de la migración africana a España. En España, ya sabéis que es un punto de llegada de pateras y es un fenómeno que, en cierto modo, preocupa a la sociedad española muchas veces por desconocimiento. Entonces hicimos una exposición en la que explicábamos cómo era ese proceso migratorio, invitamos a participar a gente que había hecho ese camino y fueron ellos los que luego crearon una exposición propia. Ya para finalizar, a día de hoy seguimos trabajando en esa línea. Sabemos que tenemos que reformar la exposición permanente. Tenemos otro gran reto, que es cómo incluimos a nuestra sociedad, a los españoles, dentro del discurso del Museo de Antropología. Y estamos tratando de buscar las soluciones en lo que es un gran reto profesional. A día de hoy creemos que este cambio en la exposición permanente podría darse en 4 o en 5 años. Todavía no lo tenemos muy claro, hemos empezado ahora a caminar. Pero mientras tanto queremos pensar qué puede aportar ese Museo de Antropología, qué podemos aportar a la sociedad en general. Hemos comprendido que nuestras colecciones son muy particulares, son muy específicas, pero también entendemos que nuestra labor como responsables de esas colecciones es ofrecer lecturas que ayuden a afrontar un poco cuáles son los retos y los peligros de la sociedad futura, porque al fin y al cabo entendemos que efectivamente un museo, y yo creo que esta situación actual que hemos vivido en estos 2 años anteriores, el museo debe convertirse en un espacio donde por lo menos podamos opinar y decir cómo queremos vivir el futuro. Y esa es un poco la línea en la que queremos trabajar y en la que se ha embarcado el Museo Nacional de Antropología. Os invito a todos y con esto finalizo. Obrigado por escucharme. Muchas gracias a todos.
Invito a tomar tu plaça. Ora, vamos agora então avançar para o momento de debate. É 1 ou 2 horas? 2? Ah! Pronto, eu sei. E por isso peço a todos os participantes, please, Hannah, Guido, António, Paulo.
Mas é que não há realmente tempo para o debate como previsto. Podemos começar? Podemos começar. Não sei se não deveria falar em inglês, uma vez que os nossos colegas na mesa, da minha parte há o colega de Espanha, mas que provavelmente entende também inglês. We are very late in our time schedule, and in fact we are beginning when it was supposed to finish to go to lunch, because we would have to have lunch around 1 o'clock, and we are almost, even before that, we have already passed. So, I think we have not conditions to have really a round table now, but in any case, I think I'm speaking in English to begin with, because we have 2 colleagues here which would not understand Portuguese, and it's important to have they included in our debate. Well, So we have had 2 days here listening to hearing experiences and reflections, theoretical or conceptual reflections, and also practical examples. One master idea, one crucial and main idea I would sum up now is that we museums professionals, and we are here in this condition, we have first of all to stick on our ethical duties, our ethical code, our ICOM ethical code, and our duties as professionals, what is traditional called the museum's functions. And of course, one of the main museum's functions is inventory of collections, documentation on collections, and public disposal of information. Not only collections, physically speaking, but also all the information, all the data relating collections. And this applies to all collections, not only for extra-European collections. And this is really our first duty. We all saw that inquiry conducted by ICOM Portugal in this specific domain of extra-European collections in Portuguese museums has been answered by, let's say, 55%, 30% of the museums, of the universe of museums of the Portuguese network of museums. And this is really the universe that we should consider. About 160 museums is the reference, not 4,000, not 400 or 600 or 1,000 as a maximum of. In Portugal, there are maybe more than 1,000, 1,200 things calling themselves museums. But they are not museums. Maybe half of them, 500 to 600, are museums. But from these, only 160 are recognized as museums. So having about 50 answered is not so bad as that. But of course, it's not enough. And maybe the reason for this less than 50% of answering to the inquiry is that because almost all of the ones which have answered, they say they have inventories. They have not studied collections. Not 60% of them inform that they have studies. But 19%, I quote by memory, say that they have inventories. I figure that the others who didn't answer is because they are in a sense ashamed of not having inventories. Or some of them have not at all extra-European collections. But they could say so, and they didn't. So, the first message I would sum up from this encounter is that we professionals, we have to really insist on the need of have inventories of collections and good databases about collections. The history of the objects, incorporation, and all that. That is absolutely crucial. And in saying so, we have to really establish a very, very strong frontier against all those who consider that this is a secret domain, a domain where we don't have to have public responsibility. And I was impressed because today the only newspaper who gave news on this encounter, a national reference newspaper in Portugal, had the box for commentaries, which usually is a garbage box, but not in reference papers where there is a filtration on comments. But one of the comments by a moderator, which means a reader with special status, recognized that someone was saying that good for Portuguese museums have not answered, only a minority, because nobody has to know about. This is a shame, and we cannot at all accept that as professionals. Our responsibility goes ahead, first of all. So let's insist on that with our colleagues, Portuguese colleagues, I mean, that the work has been carried out. Of course, we have enormous limitations. We are only a few. Museums are becoming empty spaces. I mean, in what regards staff, people, workers. But nevertheless, this is really our main focus as professionals. Then there are all the other issues, problematic issues, more political in the good sense, civic, in the good sense of the term. Political, because often political has acquired a bad sense. I still stick on the idea of politics as a good activity, and is our commitment, civic commitment. When we enter in that, we can, of course, have different views on the subject of, like, return back of collections, devolution, ways of presenting objects, different views, cooperative activities, and so on and so on and so on. We can have different views on that. The world is not uniform in no domain of human activity, and that's life. That's like that. Yesterday, we saw several issues related to the returning back, for instance, which is a very sensitive issue. Our colleagues, I learned a lot. I appreciate all the interventions, I mean. I appreciate it all. But let me, in this particular moment, emphasize the one of Guido, because it is very inspiring and provocative in the good sense. Since the bad and dramatic experience derived from Mobutu intervention and the loss of collections, which were introduced in the market of art, after the initial devolution of more than 100 objects to Congo, the African market of art has grown up. And so we have to learn with bad experiences. And in this, I appreciate it. The thing has not to be catched, it has to be speaked openly. Up to, of course, was not, as yesterday I pointed out, giving some examples. After having the negotiation, the idea that at the end, for the lands of origin, and I mean expressly lands, not countries of origin, we have to stop. What really means interest, in my view, is to have a representation, as he said also, is to have a representation, a good representation, a sample of their culture. Cultures in general, not the question of legality, which is also, to me, a very limit also, is not at the end so important like that. It's much more important to have a good representation of their own cultures than to have the things which were kept illegally at the epoch. Well, there are a lot of issues, also the final destination, which concerns me a lot as a member of ICOM. Museums as final destinations of when to return a collection may not be the only possible institutions. Churches, cultural centers, and so on can also be the final destination. Also, we are not in conditions to ask for conditions in the final destination places for paradigmatic, exemplar conditions, which we don't have in our own countries. We have not to be paternalistic on that. But here again, there is a limit for me. The destruction of collections. And I gave yesterday examples related to human remains with very different positions regarding final destination of human remains. So it is a very problematic issue. Also, we often limitate ourselves when analyzing this situation to colonialism and to colonial relationship. And we all, of course, people of our time, we declare ourselves anti-colonialists. But then, only a few of us go ahead up to declare themselves as also anti-imperialists. And the continuum between empire and colony has not been also considered in most of us. And we know, Portuguese, to begin with us, that our collections which are abroad in the British Museum or in the Louvre Museum and so on, have been stole for us, not in a colonial relationship in traditional terms, but in an empire relationship, imperialistic relationship. So let's not be so naive as to consider that the anti-colonialist fight can be pursued without the more encompassing in the time and in the space anti-imperialistic fight also. And I will end this short introduction by asking the ones of you who want to intervene, to raise questions to our, or giving the floor also to my colleagues in the table. Is there alguém que queira fazer perguntas? Pode ser em português, claro. Eu falei em inglês só para que eles entendessem, mas pode ser em português e certamente que encontramos maneira de traduzir para inglês. Questões? Querem colocar questões? Sim.
Desculpe, eu acho que devíamos, antes disso, colocar uma questão de como é que isto vai funcionar, porque eu não estou a perceber nem o que estou a fazer, nem como é que isto vai funcionar. Quanto tempo temos, se pretende que a gente fale, se não vou para a plateia, porque eu também tenho perguntas para fazer.
Não, eu penso que toda a gente que está nesta mesa pode também intervir, quando quiser.
Sim, mas pretende-se que a gente intervenha ou que responda a perguntas?
Não, pode. O que me foi explicado inicialmente, se tivéssemos começado às 10 para o meio-dia...
Sim, que estamos atrasados, já percebi, mas...
Não é só atrasados, estamos fora de tempo. É mais do que atrasados. Sim, provavelmente sim, se é essa a sua opinião. Mas... eu, antes de subir para aqui, estava previsto que fosse uma mesa redonda em que estava o Paulo e estava o António. E era entre os três, na mesa, e depois com perguntas, coisas. Mas tudo isso foi ultrapassado.
Não, isto não é nenhuma crítica, eu pessoalmente estou à vontade, porque tenho todo o prazer de receber mais do que deputado, e o que eu mesmo dizer é que prescindia da minha presença.
Pois, foi o que o António fez, que até não quis vir para a mesa. Não, mas pode fazer perguntas, ou não é perguntas, pode intervir a partir daí.
Estamos a acelerar um pouco, eu sugeria que ouvíssemos as primeiras questões da plateia.
Certo. E depois passamos uma roda pela mesa com quem quiser falar.
Certo. Para tentarmos rentabilizar.
Ok, então vá.
Um dos membros da plateia queria colocar uma questão.
Aqui. Sim.
So first of all, I would like to thank all the interventions. It was very interesting to hear about the experiences of all the speakers. I have a question for Luís Pérez. It's about something that I didn't understand, that when in 1993, I didn't understand if it was created the Museu das Culturas Espanholas and Culturas Não Europeias. Was it created, these two museums, or not? I did not understand. I really wanted to say that, the experience from other countries that are ahead of us are really inspiring for us and for me. And there are examples that we have to follow to develop our work about these non-European collections. So thank you very much to ICOM also that organized this meeting. Thank you very much.
Is there another intervention from the board, please?
Sim, thank you very much for everyone and for the presentations. I had a question that was related to the results that were presented of the survey earlier before the presentations, and that is about what follows next from these results, what will be done with the results, and what work will follow from these results. And then relating that also to the other speakers, international speakers, I was wondering if there's been experience of also carrying out such surveys on non-European or colonial collections, and what have been experiences of carrying out such surveys, if these surveys have been carried out. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other intervention? Yes, please. Then I will give the word to our colleagues here.
Muito bom dia. Transmitindo aqui o chat, só há uma pergunta, mas antes de transmitir a pergunta, queria dizer que um senhor Jorge Guerra disse que era simplesmente um espectador e deu os parabéns pela esclarecedora sessão de ontem. Também temos aqui uma Rita Gaspar que diz parabéns à organização pelo encontro e pelo debate que tem gerado. Achei que era de nota a dar. Agora a pergunta é de Catarina Simões e questiona que neste contexto, ela colocou a pergunta na altura que estavam a ser apresentados os resultados dos inquéritos. Então, neste contexto, a superior percentagem dos bens provenientes da China, onde se integram muitas peças de encomenda europeia, são avaliados pelos mesmos. A pergunta é que critérios, se os critérios são os mesmos para as coleções da China que são para as coleções coloniais. Os critérios de avaliação.
Não há mais intervenções. Eu proponho, houve uma pergunta específica ao nosso colega espanhol e, portanto, eu propunha que ele respondesse em primeiro lugar. Depois, houve outra pergunta sobre o follow-up do inquérito, eventualmente um de vocês podia responder. E depois eu daria a palavra aos restantes para poderem dizer de sua justiça, dizerem o que entenderem em termos de considerações sobre estas matérias. Faz favor, Luís.
Siempre han existido dos museos de antropología, uno de ellos dedicado a España y el otro a las culturas de fuera de España. Perdón. Siempre ha habido dos museos, uno dedicado a España y otro dedicado a las culturas de fuera de España. En el año 93 se entiende que esa separación es absurda, porque España no vive aislado de lo que pasa en el resto del mundo. Y se pretende unir los dos museos para explicar de manera global la cultura española, entendiéndola como los flujos que llegan también de fuera, las influencias, las corrientes culturales, pero realmente esa unión nunca llegó a ser, solo fue sobre papel. Nunca existió un museo que tratase lo español y lo extranjero, lo exterior, de manera conjunta. Y de hecho, a día de hoy, en España no existe ese museo. Existe un museo en almacenes, hablamos de 100.000 piezas sin exponer, pero no hemos sido capaces de hacer un museo que hable de nosotros mismos.
Por favor, algum de vocês que queira ajudar-nos? Não sei.
Well, concerning the question of Sophia, at this moment we are maintaining the inquiry to the beginning of December. So that is a process. Concerning the follow-up, well, I don't know. The only reason why we made this inquiry is just to know how the collections, non-European collections, are represented in Portuguese museums. It's nothing more than that, I think. And if the director of the ICOM, the president of ICOM, want to answer more, okay, Maria?
Evidentemente que isto é um princípio. O inquérito não é um fim em si próprio, é o início do debate e justamente este encontro é a continuação desse processo que continuará com a publicação do fim, como já se disse, e naturalmente, na sequência destas conclusões, vamos ter que definir também em conjunto, porque vão ser as opiniões de todos vós que aqui estão, de tudo aquilo que nos qual é a etapa seguinte. Agora, é muito claro para nós que é fundamental que haja uma continuação e que essa continuação passa pelo aprofundar do conhecimento das nossas coleções. E o aprofundar do conhecimento das coleções não é dissociável do fornecimento às nossas equipas das ferramentas necessárias para produzir o conhecimento que nós sabemos que está em falta para poder, depois aí sim, enfrentar todos os desafios que se nos colocam e que são bem evidentes através das experiências que nos foram trazidas pelos nossos colegas. Já agora, porque eu penso que também, eventualmente, fará sentido responder à questão sobre porquê a diferença entre coleções, creio que era asiáticas e coloniais. Ora, isso já é a partir de um pressuposto que nós ainda não temos. Primeiro que tudo, há um levantamento da situação. E como a certa altura foi aqui referido, e muito bem, pela Hannah, o que é que são coleções coloniais? Portanto, nós só podemos chegar a essa própria definição depois de um conhecimento melhor, mais esclarecido daquilo que são as nossas coleções.
Português e é como se estivesse sentado, não é? E peço-vos desculpa porque eu venho das ciências exatas e naturais e este inquérito para mim tem dois problemas de fundo que hoje para mim foram bem notórios e que acho que vale a pena eventualmente, pelo menos, elucidar as pessoas sobre isso. Não querendo deixar de vos dizer que acho que é um princípio muito positivo e muito correto. A primeira é o conceito de coleção. Eu não sei exatamente qual é o conceito que cada um tem de coleção, se uma coleção tem um número finito ou infinito de objetos, mas isto torna o resultado estatístico no mínimo duvidoso, ou seja, eu tenho uma coleção de 300 mil insetos e conta como uma coleção no cômpito geral, não é? É claro que eu sei que os museus de História Natural e universitários são um bocadinho estranhos por causa dos seus quantitativos, mas valia a pena, de algum lado, haver essa nota numa fase posterior, e eu já falei com quem fiz e sei que vocês têm consciência disso, não é nenhuma crítica, mas valia a pena acrescentarmos essa questão. E depois temos outro problema, que é saber quais são os objetos que a gente pode considerar não europeus. Isto parece tonto o que eu estou a dizer, não é? Mas os objetos naturais, um leão, um veado, um javali, uma girafa, é um objeto colonial ou não é um objeto colonial? E pior do que isso, é uma planta, que ainda por cima reproduz-se, nasce, cresce e multiplica-se, não é? É também um herbário, uma atitude colonial em termos de coleção ou não. Eu acho que este tipo de questões, sendo marginais, eu percebo, porque efetivamente há uma perspectiva antropomórfica quando se faz qualquer coisa deste tipo, não é? Se eu trouxer um ornamento de penas, é claramente um objeto colonial, mas se eu trouxer o papagaio com as penas todas, se calhar já não entra na coleção, não é? E isso é importante, até porque nós temos muitos papagaios e outros que tais, não é? Com essas situações. Outra coisa tem a ver com a geografia, e nós portugueses temos um problema terrível, é que nós até na Ásia tínhamos colónias. Não é? E, portanto, a noção de colónia tem a ver com a maneira como o povo se distribuiu. Portanto, há alguma necessidade depois, numa fase posterior, talvez afinar estes detalhes, porque isto vai, obviamente, introduzir um conjunto de resultados, e já não falo neste problema comunicacional de fazer uns gráficos muito bonitos, mas todos dos mesmos tons, não é? Não sei se há aqui algum daltónico, mas deve ter sido, porque é importante realmente para a comunicação, e foi chamada essa atenção. Se a gente faz as coisas é para ser bonitas, mas é para comunicar, e tons da mesma cor não comunicam. Também vos queria dizer que, da parte da Universidade de Coimbra, e penso que se calhar todos os meus colegas das outras universidades, nós teremos todo o gosto em ajudarmos, de alguma maneira, a purificar um pouco o modelo. E queria também só acabar fazendo um comentário ao nosso colega, que gostei muito de Espanha, que é um pouco a razão da recolha das peças. Eu ainda sou daqueles que acredito que quando se faziam as viagens filosóficas de 1700 e no final de 1700, havia um conceito de viagem filosófica muito clara. Não era propriamente uma superioridade, obviamente que o objetivo era económico, mas também era sobretudo trazer para o continente, de facto, as curiosidades, aquilo que os outros não conheciam. E nós portugueses temos aquele célebre e espantoso episódio da oferta do rinoceronte ao Papa, 200 anos antes de 1700, que é espantoso. Portanto, não era tanto a visão colonial, mas era tanto mostrar que havia mais mundo, que obviamente nós portugueses e espanhóis descobrimos, não é? Como toda a gente sabe, havia mais mundo para além do nosso continente, e a recolha desses objetos não era necessariamente uma manifestação de superioridade. Sim, lá queria categorizá-los, torná-los católicos, pode ser, mas era sobretudo trazer para os reinos o que havia nos outros mundos, não é? É claro que depois na base tem um pressuposto colonial, mas não foi um pouco isso, e grande parte das coleções acabaram por se constituir nas universidades precisamente porque se estudavam as coisas exóticas, e depois, claro, abriram. Portanto, era só estes dois comentários que queria fazer.
Posso dizer uma coisa? Só dizer, porque foi colocado aqui, em relação ao inquérito, este inquérito não é um inquérito às coleções coloniais, numa primeira fase. É um inquérito que enfoca as coleções não europeias, e aí engloba tudo. E isso depois seria um segundo passo.
Tem razão.
Por isso, só esclarecer esta situação.
Eu peço desculpa, mas não resisto a fazer uma pergunta que tinha pensado se tivéssemos feito a mesa redonda.
Fazíamos agora um almoço, não é?
Não, mas esta acho que é importante, porque referiste a questão das coleções naturais. Bom, o que é que tu pensas, porque já existe, sobre o pedido do Chile para que se devolva ao Chile espécimes que foram colhidos por Darwin?
Pois, é de facto uma questão interessante.
Não, mas com o argumento. O argumento, por exemplo, que é uma espécie fóssil que foi identificada como fóssil por os naturalistas europeus e que, portanto, não existe representada no Chile.
Pronto, eu tenho realmente uma posição em relação a isso. O que eu acho é que nós devemos organizar as coleções policêntricas interdisciplinares. Por exemplo, nós estamos a preparar uma das viagens filosóficas do Alexandre Rodrigues Ferreira e, se tudo correr bem, terá 4 núcleos, não é? Lisboa, Coimbra, Paris, porque há outros colonialistas que roubam os países mais pobres, dos quais o Napoleão é um bom exemplo, não é?
Claro.
E em boa hora, porque se calhar tinham desaparecido, e Brasil. Portanto, eu defendo mais do que devolver as coleções, que haja o reconhecimento de importâncias que eles têm na história que se quer contar. Mas, por outro lado, e em suma, eu acho que as coleções devem estar onde são bem preservadas, não é? Mas abertas a todos.
Okay. Sorry to have this interval in Portuguese, but I ask now you to comment on whatever.
Tem razão.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, I'd like to make a last comment, and that is when we talk about non-European collections, we're talking particularly about ethnographic collections. And there is very little attention to contemporary art. And I take the case of Congo, for example. We're all talking about restitution of objects to Congo, but Congo has some of the most world-famous artists in the world on contemporary art, and there's not one of those works currently in Congo itself. So how can you generate interest of young people if none of that contemporary art is available? So we need to discuss that role of contemporary art, that richness, and I salute my colleague, Professor Ribeiro, for his initiative in launching the Europa Oxala exhibition that is opening on 3rd of March in Lisbon, where he asked a number of artists sort of from the diaspora to make works around sort of European colonial history. And it's very impressive, and I think it's an important step, but we need to make sure that that type of works can also go back to Africa at some stage. And so it's an aspect that I haven't been able to talk in my presentation. Also, contemporary art plays a major role now in our museum. We're invited 17 contemporary artists to present their works in our museum to contrast with the colonial message. And so my plea is don't forget contemporary art in that whole discussion. But thank you very much for a very interesting conference.
Thank you. Now, Hannah, please.
As a final remark, maybe on the term colonial objects confronted with non-European, as it's called here mainly, And regarding the question about the art from China or objects from China, there are many objects, of course, which are not colonial, but just trade. I'm thinking of Chinese porcelain, which there was a huge exchange of that, commercial exchange, or products made from ivory, like already in the medieval time, before colonialism, there were already carved ivory objects in Europe, not coming from elephants living in Europe, I'm sure. So that was also a trade, a commercial aspect. So in that sense, your term, actually, non-European, covers more than colonial. Thank you.
António.
Thank you. I would like to try to clarify the difference between a colonial object and an exotic object. It's not the same thing. So what is important on the back of this idea of colonial object is the attitude that can be colonial or not, which is completely different from an object that is exotic. And I think that what is on back of this definition is much more important than to try to identify, to give the same signification for both. And I take the opportunity to do a comment. I really appreciate the intervention of Anna and Guido, because I subscribe everything what they said. And I think we have to take this opportunity as guidelines for the process in Portugal. I mean, what they are doing now in Holland and in Belgium and in France, they are reference for our process in Portugal. Everything what they said, it is the correct process to begin a process of restitution in Portugal. And I really don't understand why the number of the directors of museums in Portugal who try to be a kind of fortress against the resisting again the historical process. It's like what was happening about independence in Africa. The process of restitution is irreversible. It's absolutely irreversible. There are no other possibility. And I think that we did discuss about the process of decolonizing the spirit and decolonizing the mentalities. Maybe it's the first step to begin this process in Portugal.
Não sei se mais alguém quer fazer um último e breve e final comentário, designadamente da organização ou não. Se não, estamos muito adiantados no tempo para almoçar. Não sei o que é que vocês querem. Há alguém? Eu não estou a ver se...
It's not a question or comment. That is a roundtable with international speakers that might not be able to speak Portuguese, and there's this back and forth between the both languages. I find it very non-inclusive. And I understand some people might not speak English very well, but then maybe in terms of the choice of who should be included or not, then consideration for the language I think is really important. But that was just a little comment, and I was feeling a bit uncomfortable with. Yeah.
Well, it's just a comment. Let's finish. Maria Jesus, queres dizer alguma palavra para fechar, como Chair of ICOM Portugal, maybe to close?
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you very much for coming and for participating in this small step, we believe, in dealing with a subject that has to be in our daily I wouldn't say routine, but in our daily concerns. And I know we don't have much time left, so I would like to finish by thanking Ana Maria de Ferreira and asking for a big round of applause for having us here and all the work she and her team did for us and to make this meeting possible. It was a wonderful partnership, and ICOM Portugal can only be very thankful for all that you have done for us. And of course, we count on all of you to go on working and to go on meeting. We feel it is very important that as many of us can meet and start working together again after those 2 years of forced stop. We're not that many in this room, but we hope that in the near future all our meetings and our exchange of opinions, experiences and so on will increase. Thank you very much, all of you.